I'm Sue Becker. I'm so glad to be here with you this morning and welcome you here to Bread Beckers, one of my favorite topics. I love teaching cooking classes, but I love teaching people the nutritional benefits of freshly ground grain. We are live streaming today, and I want to welcome our online audience to the Real Bread, the Staff of Life. A little bit about myself. I graduated from high school very long time ago. This year's my 50th class reunion. Headed to the University of Georgia as a pre-med student. Got to Georgia, realized I did not want to be in school that long. And I did not want that type of grueling career afterwards, time consuming. I knew I wanted to be a wife and a mother, always wanted to be a wife and a mother. I met my husband at the University of Georgia. I was from Savannah and he was from Atlanta. That's a story in itself. And, but we met there, and I now have 9 children and 14 grandchildren so far. So I accomplished that goal. But at the university, I knew I wanted to, I love the human body. I knew I wanted to study that. So I did change my major to pharmacy school, got accepted in pharmacy school. 1 quarter there, I went, this is not what I want to do either. And the dean of pharmacy school led me to food science. It was an up-and-coming industry with many electives to go into many different fields of study. So all of my credits transferred, and as a junior, if any of you know what I'm talking about, that's important. You don't go changing your major in your junior year of college, typically. But so that was important for me, and I graduated from Georgia and worked as a food microbiologist for Kraft Foods for almost 5 years before I had my first child. Then even after graduating, I laugh, and I told someone the other day, I said, I think I was a better student after I got out of college than I was in college, just distractions in college. But I loved biochemistry. I loved physiology. I continued to study. I didn't get rid of those college textbooks. I studied them. I read people like Adelle Davis, which was very popular in the 70s and 80s. She was a biochemist, and I just came at everything from a whole food standpoint. I wasn't great at eating healthy, but I still studied the body, knew how the body worked, came at things from if something's not working in my body, I must be missing a nutrient. That was kind of my school of thought. So I just continued to study. And food science, let me back up just a little bit. Food science is not a nutrition degree, just so you know. Food science is the study of food processing. Everything that has to be done to our food to make it sit, in some ways, safely on the shelf, or ferment it to make other foods, or the technology and the science behind all of that. So I had children, I fed them healthy food as best I knew how. But in 1991, I was introduced to a healthy eating concept that radically changed my life, opened my eyes. I don't know why. When I read and understood this information, I had never put these pieces of the puzzle together. But here's what I learned in the journal that I read. It was entitled How to Greatly Reduce the Risk of Common Diseases. In that journal was the history of white flour and how it came to be, and then a brief discussion of the common diseases that plague America and how it's directly related to this processed flour that we're now consuming in all realms, from cakes to cookies to bread to, cereal to muffins, whatever, any type of processed flour product. Here's what I learned. I learned that grains are the most nutrient-dense food that God has given us. I learned, however, that only when the flour is freshly milled does it contain all the nutrients of the whole grain. That was important to me. I learned that whole grain flour actually spoils. It's not able to sit on the shelf, and that's why they began to process it the way I did. This was the biggie. I learned that term enrichment, that as a food scientist, I was reading on those labels, those product labels of flour or baked goods. I learned that it was not a favor that the food industry was doing for us, which is kind of coming from a food scientist standpoint. That's what I thought. I thought we were making it better than it would have been had we not enriched it. But I learned that was a somewhat deceptive term, and that it was not a favor the food industry was doing for us. They were replacing a mere fraction of the nutrients that are lost by taking the bran and germ out. So these are all things that I learned. I learned that prior to the 1900s, most of the bread eaten and consumed in this country was made at home. It was either milled, the flour was either milled at home, or communities were actually built up around the local millers. They were a very important part of the community. And I learned that the health of America began to rapidly decline after 1910, when the steel rolling mills were invented that were sifting the bran and germ away from the flour to produce this long-lasting white flour. And we're going to talk about many of those diseases today. Needless to say, I became excited about this information I was learning. I was introduced to the concept of milling my own grain and making my own bread. And how many of you don't have a clue what a grain mill even looks like? Okay, a few of you. So at the end of the class, it's not a cooking class, but if you want to stay, I will pull up my grain mill and show it to you. But it was always funny to me when I first started milling my flour. I would take bread everywhere, and I'd take it to church and potlucks and coffee cake and muffins, and people go, "Oh, I want your recipe." And I would go, "Well, I can give you my recipe, but I mill my flour." And they would look at me like, and the first question would be, "You do what?" And I would say, "I mill my flour." The second question I couldn't figure out for years. They would look at me and they go, "Where do you live?" I think they were, as I wrote my book and studied the history of white flour even more, and the big stone mills and the ox, treading out the grain. We hear that scripture. I'm like, okay, they think I have a farm and a barn, and they may even envision that I am now the ox treading out the grain. I don't know, but it was always funny to me. They go, "You do what?" And I go, "I mill my flour." "Where do you live?" So it's very easy to do, but I learned the concept of milling my own grain in my home with a small in-home flour mill. With my degree in food science, like I said, and my keen background in biochemistry and physiology, I do not know why I never came across this information before. I believe God in his timing puts us in the right place at the right time. I purchased my little grain mill, and I began to make all the bread for my family. I can stand here today and tell you we've not had white bread or white flour in our home since 1991. And I had 5 young children at the time. And this is the only change in our diet we made, is that we now added this bread to the already real foods we were already eating. I grew up Southern, so I grew up cooking. And food at our home was never out of a box or a can or a frozen. It was real meat, real potatoes, field peas, green beans, a lot of times from the garden. So we were not a sickly bunch, but I can tell you this. This was the only change in our diet, pretty healthy diet at the time that I made, and the health benefits to my family, particularly myself, were immediate, very noticeable, and very significant. In the first day, the mill came in, took it out of the box, whipped up some flour, made some bread, and I ate that bread and I pooped the next morning. This was a huge change for me. I'd struggled with constipation all my life, didn't care when I'm little, but yeah, when you get older, you start realizing that something's not right, and you feel the difference. So my constipation was relieved. I began to notice I had more energy, and when you have 5 young children, one of them nursing, 3 under the age of 3, you notice when you have more energy. I noticed my sinus congestion, my chronic sinus congestion went away. I had lived on antihistamines, had stuffy, snotty nose, postnasal drip most of my life. I just thought that was normal for me. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, of what we think is just normal. And we're even told by the medical profession, well, that's just normal these days, and there's not much you can do about it. I began to notice my sugar cravings went away. Like I told you, we didn't live on Little Debbie's and Twinkies and soda in the house. But there were certain times where I really wanted something sweet, and all of this went away. My frequent headaches went away. I suffered with migraines, not like some people do, but significant migraines at times when I would get headaches. And I just seemed to have and I always thought it was probably my sinus congestion, just some headaches there. So these were the things I noticed in the first few weeks, some the first day. But by the end of the month, no more antihistamines, No more constipation, energy levels up. And I can also tell you, I've not had an antihistamine or a decongestant of any kind since 1991, 31 years. That is how many? No, I won't make you show your hands. But it's a lot of America lives on antihistamines. I did. I had to have them or I couldn't sleep at night. I could make it through the day, but I had to have something because any of y'all suffer with this? Your whole head just closes up at night. Okay, so the overall health of our family changed. Again, when you have 5 children and you go to church and they socialize with other children, you seem to just get every bug that comes around. That didn't happen anymore. And one of my children's warts went away in the first month, and you may be laughing. You're like, okay, she lost me here. I got a wart story to tell you. We'll probably do that after lunch. And I knew it was the bread because of what had happened years before. So, not to mention the fact, how many of y'all like the muffins this morning? The bread is delicious. Now, I was a baker before. I used white flour to make bread. I didn't always make my bread. Sometimes I bought the whole grain bread from the store. That's not really, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But the bread was delicious. I had bought whole wheat flour from the store and tried to make muffins out of it, and they were like gritty and grainy and dry, and I had to put white flour in them to make them better. And the same with bread. Never could I get a fluffy loaf of bread or a fluffy muffin out of whole wheat flour purchased from the store. It's because they take the oils out of that, or the flour would spoil. But you're gonna really understand by the end of the class, I am very passionate person. I'm a very all or nothing kind of person. And that grain mill came into our home. And when I read this information, and I'm like, I don't care. We're doing this. We're never eating white flour again. If we have to choke this stuff down, we're eating it, And so I couldn't believe when I made that loaf of bread and it was fluffy and soft. Wait till y'all taste the rolls for lunch. Fluffy and soft, and a soft muffin with no white flour and no white sugar at all. I was excited. And this was healthy food my whole family would eat. I didn't have to make my children eat this. I'll do most anything. I've done brewer's yeast over the years. I've done green drinks, and I've choked them down. And they gave me some energy. Yes, they did. They didn't touch my constipation, sinus congestion, or any of that like the bread did. But those were not things my kids were going to do. They would look at me and go, no. We're not eating something or drinking something that looks like goose poop. Not happening. So the bread, they loved. They had their different likes and dislikes. Some of them didn't like blueberry muffins, and some of them did. But for the most part, they loved everything. Donuts, all you can eat, rolls, tortillas, pumpkin pie, didn't matter. They loved it, made with whole grains and no white flour and white sugar. As I began to share the bread with other people, I actually began to make bread for others, taking bread to church. The next thing I knew, people were coming to me going, I want to do this. I feel better. I pooped the next day. Whatever it was, and asking me, where can I get a grain mill, and will you teach me how to make bread for myself? And I'll never forget, I had spent all day one day making bread for others, all the while homeschooling my children, and I now had 6 children, and, making bread for my family, and very tired and weary mama met my husband in the driveway. Brad, you might have met him out parking cars this morning. But I looked at him that day, and we had always wanted to start a business of some kind of our own. Brad was in the construction industry. I was a stay-at-home mom, and we thought we could start some kind of little family business. But Brad said, I want a food-related business, but not a restaurant, not a pizza place, because I make my own pizza, and people would say, oh, you need to open a pizza place. Nope. But he said, when hard and difficult times come to our nation, people have to eat, and I want to supply people with food. And here we are. But anyway, I met him in the driveway that day, and I just looked at him and I said, I don't think I'm supposed to make bread for the world. I think I'm supposed to teach the world how to make bread for themselves. I had no idea how prophetic that word was in 1992. God has called us now to Haiti. We've opened a bakery there. We have 3 bread baking operations there where we train people to make bread. Last year, God called us to Tanzania. We have a bread baking operation going there where we're training them and teaching them the nutritional benefits of eating grain. We just shipped out 4 pallet loads of wheat last week to go to Haiti. So God is using us to teach the world how to make bread for themselves. So I'm very happy about that. We started our business November of 1992, 1 week before the presidential election of 1992. Some of you may remember that quite well. Well, I woke up the day after the election very early. I usually always wake up early, but a little distressed about what I saw America choosing then, 1992, 30 years ago. My goodness, how far we've come. But I was very distressed, and I'll never forget, it was a rainy morning, and I got up, and we were actually at a hotel at a election night return event, and I went in the bathroom, and I'm just sitting in there because I didn't want to wake the rest of the kids up, and I'm just reading, and God began to speak to me and give me what I call a Joseph vision. He began to speak to me that he was going to use, now mind you, this was only 1 week, and our business was called Bread Beckers, that he was going to use Bread Beckers to be like Joseph, to supply his people with grain when the public needed it. We've seen many, many trying times, and we're here to supply God's people with grain, not to hoard it, but to have it available. Grain is a perfect storable food, grains and beans. It's funny, so that was in 1992. By the spring of 1993, Brad in the construction field, he was in millwork carpentry, which is the end of the big construction. So a lot of times they were working 7 days a week, 12-hour days to finish the job on time because everybody else had been late. So we had kind of feast or famine budget. And we always saved because sometimes when a job finished, he might be out of work for weeks. But he came to me one day and he said, I want to take our money from our savings and buy wheat. He said, I've really taken this Joseph vision to heart. Now, we were small then. And we ordered 5,000 pounds of grain of wheat from a supplier. And he said, I don't know when I can get it to you. It might be months from now. We found another supplier and we ordered 5,000 pounds of grain from them. Different state, not part of the country, but still in the wheat grain basket state section. And he said, I don't know when we can get it to you. When we get a truck coming that way, we'll put yours on there. God has an incredible sense of humor and sense of timing. 2 different suppliers, not related at all, called us a few days prior and said, the truck is on the way and it will be there at such and such a time. This supplier will be there at such and such a time. This supplier, the exact same day, a few weeks apart. We all of a sudden had 10,000 pounds of wheat, which is nothing to us now. It was a lot to us then. And I wrote the check. All the money out of the savings account. I did not expect it to all go away in one day. But I was excited. We worked and we had the vision. Yay, Joseph, why, God, what are you doing here? Until the night time. I woke up in the night going, what have we done? We now don't have a cushion. If Brad gets out of work, what are we going to do? I don't think the phone company or the electric company is going to take a bucket of wheat for payment. I'm just not sure about this. And it was funny. I got up in the night. I don't think I have my little calendar. I always keep it in my Bible, but it's actually in my journal now. I woke up in the night, and so I got up because I couldn't sleep. And I'm really in turmoil. Like, what have we done? First of all, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, we've become a prepper. What am I thinking? So that was kind of funny. Or survivalist, one of those weird people, guns, grains, and gold, So I was really struggling. But as I sought the Lord, this is how I usually do when I'm distressed about something and I give it to the Lord. I pray about it and give it to him, and then I go on with my regular Bible reading. Because I've been a Christian long enough, I know enough verses I could pick out the ones I want the Lord to use to speak to me. So I'm reading along and I read my Bible and I pull out my little calendar that I've had in my Bible for 30 years, more than that now. And it always has a verse of the day. And God's used it over the years to speak to Brad and I so many times. And at some point, I'll just pull it out and go, what's my verse for the day, Well, that morning, after I cried out to God and said, oh, God, are you sure? I was asking God if he was sure that we're doing the right thing. And my verse for the day was Proverbs 11, verse 26. Listen to this verse. The people will curse him who holds back grain when the public needs it, but a blessing from God and man is upon the head of him who sells it. I shut my Bible and I rejoiced. I no longer doubted that God was going to use us. But did you hear? And when I shared it with Brad, he goes, Sue, I can think of no other verse that God could have used more specifically to answer. He could have sent me to Joseph, could have sent me to other verses, but he sent me. I never really noticed that one. But I had trouble selling things when we first started a business too. That was the other thing. I was like, oh my gosh, we're salespeople. We're selling you stuff, and I would apologize for how much something cost. But you hear what that says? The people will curse him who holds back grain when the public needs it. First of all, this is not about hoarding. This is about being a blessing to those around you. And a blessing from God and man is upon the head of him who sells it. So here we are. That was in 1993. In 1998, we had outgrown our little 1,300 square foot house. By then by 98, we had 7 children, and we incorporated with a longtime friend and partner. We made it through Y2K with my children and Brad working 24 days to package grain and meet that need when the public needed it. And we moved into this building in 1999. We were able to, this was our store and warehouse for many years. In 2009, we rented the building next door, which we've now moved 2 doors down to a bigger warehouse so that we can turn this into a store, a real store, and a kitchen. And we're so glad to be here with you, to share with you, to teach you, and to come alongside of you. You may be thinking that this is a hard road to hoe, but it is not. I'm telling you, if I can do it, you can do it. If the young men in Haiti that were getting up and going to school every day and coming home, not to a beautiful kitchen to make bread in, but making 500 to 800 rolls every day before or after school to feed the orphanages, the orphans in the orphanage, you can do it. I'm telling you. And it is the most life-changing health decision I have ever seen and ever made in all my years of teaching and learning and studying. Like I said, I've done all kinds of things, and not one brought this lasting results that I've seen. And I also always ask people, how many of y'all have tried healthy eating things? How many of you are doing them 31 years later? Not very many. How many of you are excited about them? That's where I am. I've never looked back. I've never changed because of the health benefits that it brought to my family, and it's delicious. So there's a scripture that I found that I felt like kind of described where we're at today, or even in life in general. Several years ago, I was teaching. I actually had the opportunity to share the gospel at a ministry in downtown Atlanta. And I honestly have never shared the gospel like outright, with somebody, and 7 women raised their hand to receive Christ. And I was so excited. And I was like, let's come back the next day. And I never want to do the poopy talk again. And all I want to do is share the gospel. And the next morning I woke up and Isaiah 61 was my Bible verse for the day, my calendar verse. And it says, the Spirit of God is upon me. It's anointed to qualify me to preach the gospel to the brokenhearted. And I was like, see, that's what he wants me to do. No more poopy talk, no more bread, just teach the gospel. But then the next verse said to proclaim liberty to the captives. And in the Amplified version, it says spiritual and physical. Some of us that know Jesus are not spiritual captives, but many of us are physical captives. Maybe just stuck on laxatives and decongestants, or even something more serious. And so it's funny, when I read this verse in Jeremiah, it made such sense to me. In Jeremiah 31:21, Israel's been hauled off to Babylon. They are physical captives. But it says, set up for yourselves highway markers back to Canaan. Turn your thoughts and attention to the way you went into exile. We're supposed to think about, how did we get here? How did we get here? Well, that's what I want to talk about first thing this morning, is how did we get here? So let's turn our thoughts and attention there. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, God gives us 2 types of food. First, he says, I've given you plants that bear seed. That is your food. And then he says, and I've given you plants that bear fruit with seed in it. So we have seeds and we have fruits and vegetables. Y'all with me? Okay. Fruits and vegetables are wonderful. They're very nutritious. They supply us with enzymes, with vitamins, minerals, soluble fiber. They're very, very good for us, and we need to be eating more and more and more. But what happens to fruits and vegetables over time? Some of them doesn't take much time. They spoil. They rot. Even hanging on the tree, they're decaying. They actually have enzymes that cause them to ripen. It's the very same enzymes that just keep that process going, and they spoil and decay. So can you see, though, why God gave us seeds as well? Plants that bear seeds for fruit, like grains and beans, do not decay. They are perfectly storable. Why did God tell Joseph to store grain? Grain is storable. Fruits and vegetables, you can say, store bananas. Yeah, they'll be rotten next week, right? So this is why we have both types of food. So what makes grains and beans so nutritious? Okay, I have to tell you something. I'm a science major and I'm not an artist and I'm very old school. Someone came up to me that's very technological and he said, you should do a PowerPoint. This is like my crutch. So I'm going to draw, and I think everybody should be able to see it, and they have it up on the projector there. So let's look at the anatomy of a seed. And when I say grains, if I say grain or wheat, I really mean grains and beans, any type of seed that we consume, okay? So grains, basic anatomy, very large picture. This is a kernel of wheat. Okay, or kernel of a seed. There's a few seeds that have a little different, like corn, little bit different structure and anatomy, but for the most part, a kernel of grain has several layers here on the outside of the kernel, and that is known as the bran. Now, the bran is several layers thick. It is loaded with vitamins. It's loaded with minerals. It's loaded with phytochemicals. It has fiber. It even on the outside has organisms and enzymes and protein. It's loaded with nutrients that your body needs. But its function to the seed is to protect the life of the seed, the internal structure of the seed. Left intact, this is horrible. Okay? The internal part of the seed is something known as the germ. It's here that the sprout comes from. It germinates. That's where we get that word. So this is the germ, loaded with fatty acids, vitamin E. One of the richest food sources of vitamin E is wheat in particular, but most of your grains and seeds. Okay? So this is where the little sprout has come from. The life of the plant, everything that plant is ever going to be or do is right here in the germ. Okay? Everything else, little packets of protein and starch, and this area is known as the endosperm, makes up most of the kernel of grain. About 85% of it is the endosperm, better known to you and I as white flour. Now, what did I say the white flour is? Protein and starch. For all practical purposes, it's protein and starch. All the vitamins, all the minerals, all the fiber, all the phytonutrients, the fatty acids, the vitamin E are in the bran or in the germ, okay? And the fiber is there. What is this endosperm for? It is the food for the germinating seed. Until this sprout develops roots and leaves so it can get its nutrients from the soil and the rain and the sunshine, this is its food. And that's why a seed breaks down when you get it wet or when you plant it, and then that sprout, that germ, that germination takes place and it comes forth. Okay? Now, like I said, left whole and intact, this and dry and free from bugs and rodents, this grain, this seed is storable. God created them that way. He gave us that food for a reason. If seeds were not storable, we would not have next year's crop, right? We couldn't grow even fruits and vegetables to have. So seeds are storable. Now, what happens when you break this kernel of grain open? What happens when I mill my wheat into flour? Now, all these vitamins, all these minerals, all these nutrients, all this oil is exposed to the air, and a process known as oxidation begins to take place immediately. Now, you do not have to be a science major or a chemistry lab person to understand what oxidation is. You've all cut an apple and watched it turn dark, right? You've all peeled a banana or a pear and watched it turn dark. You've all smelled rancid oils, correct? This is oxidation. Oxidation burns these nutrients, breaks them down, and causes spoilage. So that's what happens. When you break this kernel of grain open, you expose all those vitamins and minerals and all that wonderful oil and the vitamin E to the air. And most of the oxidation is going to occur as soon as the flour is milled, shortly after, in that first day or two or even 3. And I've read some studies that say after 3 days, there's relatively, just a very minute amount of vitamin E left in there from the richest food source of vitamin E. So, Excuse me, let me get a drink. So like we said earlier, prior to the 1900s, the bread was made at home. It was milled at the local miller. They were probably clueless that oxidation was taking place and that they were losing vitamins and minerals. But one thing people did know, whole grain flour spoils because of those oils going rancid. So someone discovered if we sift this nutrient-rich bran away, if we sift the oil-laden germ away and leave only what? The protein and starch, this flour won't spoil. So it led to the invention of these huge steel rolling mills in the late 1800s that would crush the grain, send it through sifters and shakers that would shake the flour. The bran and germ is more coarse than the white flour, sifting it away, producing massive volumes of this huge, of long-lasting white flour. This was an incredible invention. First time in history, though, think about this. White flour and white bread came on the scene and was now available to rich and poor alike. It had never been before. Since the beginning of time, I think people learned how to sift. They made sifters out of reeds and things like that that could sift the bran and germ away. But it was mostly reserved for the wealthy, for the kings that had, do you remember Joseph's two friends, the baker and the cupbearer? They had bakers, they had people that made the bread for them that would sift the bran and germ away, producing fluffy white flour. And there's many studies that'll show kings had all kinds of diseases that the common peasants didn't have. And the poor people ate what's called peasant bread or harvest bread that we now pay extra money to get. And they thought, we wish we could have the bread of the rich people, the white bread. But it was not so. First of all, you lose about 25% of the flour when you take the bran and germ out. So 100 pounds of grain makes about 75 pounds of white flour, 25 pounds is bran and germ. So they sifted it away to prevent spoilage. So the poor people, they couldn't, first of all, they didn't have the time to do this. They couldn't lose 25% of their food supply, whereas the wealthy, they didn't care. Just sift it away. It's interesting, in all of our travels, when our kids were growing up, we would usually stay over at whatever city a day or two to go, do something fun with them. And sometimes what Brad and I thought were fun was not always what they thought was fun. But one of the trips was in Nashville, and we went to Andrew Jackson's home. And I'll never forget, they told us, I don't remember the specifics, but Andrew Jackson died at, in 50s or 60-year-old. I don't remember. Somewhere, it was young, because I'm older than that now. But anyway, so it was very young. But so then they took us out back, and I'll never forget this. They took us out on the property, and they were showing the different huts, and some of the slave quarters were still there. And they took us to one place, and it had a mill of some kind there, or whatever. And it was where they processed the corn for the grits and the cornbread. And on the wall, on a nail, was a sifter. It was just a big round thing, and they would sift it like this. And the tour guide made this comment. And also on that wall was a picture of Henry, or whatever his name was, that was the slave foreman, the head slave. Here's what got my attention. Henry lived to be 90-something years old. The master in the house died at 50, 60, whatever he was. But here's what she said. She showed us the sifter, and she said the slaves would sift the corn flour, and they would make the master's cornbread out of the white fluffy flour, and they ate the sifting. So they were living off the bran and germ, and the rich man in the house was living off of the white flour. He died at a very young age, and Henry died at 94. Really caught my attention, and we see that over and over. So this is what began to happen, though, in the late 1800s when the steel rolling mill was invented. And by 1910, 1911, somewhere right there, the local millers were out of business. The steel rolling mills took over the market. And like I said, white bread, white flour was now food for rich and poor alike. You know, there's a scripture about that. Proverbs 23 tells you this: be careful when you sit down to the king's table. Do not crave his dainties and his delicacies. Have you ever thought about what those things were? I always thought probably offered to idols or something like that. Now I think they were white flour fluffy things. That's what I'm thinking. Dainties and delicacies. And if you think I'm passionate, it even says put a knife to your throat lest you be given to gluttony. And we'll talk about gluttony and obesity shortly as well. But here's a warning from God. Be careful when you sit down. Don't worry. Don't crave the rich man's food because it might not be so good for you. But anyway, so the steel rolling mills came on the scene, and by 1911, 1910, they were pretty much commonplace. White bread was food for everyone. Something unexpected happened. 3 diseases became epidemic at the time. Beriberi, which is a vitamin B1 deficiency, that's thiamine. Beriberi results in nervous disorders. Pellagra was a second disease, epidemic, just plaguing the United States. It's a vitamin B3 deficiency or niacin. It results in GI disturbances, skin eruptions, mental insanity, and death. It was known as the disease of the 4 Ds. It particularly plagued the southeastern United States. When I read some information, studied it a little bit more, the first case of pellagra was actually diagnosed here in Atlanta, Georgia. There were 30,000 cases that first year, and I believe it was 1902. I can't remember if it was 1902 or 1905. I never can remember. I think it was 1902. 30,000 cases that first year. This was a disease they had never seen before. First, they thought it was infectious, but they eventually traced it to a B vitamin 3 deficiency. The third disease was anemia. All of a sudden, the country has anemia. Again, health officials all over the nation were trying to figure out what in the world is going on, why these diseases, what is happening. And I can't remember if pellagra in particular. I met someone in our early days of business that actually said her mother passed away in a mental institution in South Carolina from pellagra. South Carolina and Georgia particularly plagued by pellagra. Our main food sources were corn, which does not supply vitamin B3, and wheat. So when we lost it in wheat, we didn't have it anymore. So plagued health officials, they eventually traced it to the new white flour on the market and the missing vitamins and minerals and nutrients. They went to the millers and said, you got to put the bran and germ back in. The millers are like, sure. No, they were not. They had found a very lucrative market for the byproducts of the milling process. The bran and germ was now sold to the cattle feed industry to make cattle feed, and it is still done today. And unfortunately, it's done all over the world. I made 13 trips over the past 5 years to Haiti and taught them about the sifting of the bran and germ and why we want to be milling the flour to make the bread for the kids. And I was in the marketplace one day with one of the young men that was kind of the lead bread maker. And if you've ever been to a market in Haiti, I mean, it's all just out on the road. But there was this big sack, like a 50-pound sack, was open and the top turned back and a cup sitting in it. And I looked at it and it looked like bran and possibly a mixture of bran and germ. And I'm like, what is this? And the young man couldn't remember the English words for it. And he just said, the stuff they take out of the bread, out of the flour. And I'm like, well, why is it here? What are they selling it for? I was thinking maybe you bought it as cereal. He goes, oh no, it's pig feed. I'm like, got a nation that's starving and you're feeding the most nutritious thing you could possibly have to the pigs. When I shared that with the nannies at the orphanage and told them what had happened, they all started laughing and speaking Creole, and I couldn't understand a word for a second or two. And finally the translator looked and said, they're laughing because now they know why the pigs are fat and the people are not. And when I went to Tanzania, we went to this little remote village, and I went for a little walk, and I heard this grinding sound, and they were in there grinding corn, and they were pre-cracking it, taking off the outer part, and then they would take the rest of it and mill it into fine flour. And I said, what is the outside part? What are they doing with that? That's chicken feed. Went to the market in Tanzania as well. They grow rice there. Right there in the marketplace. They're milling it. And I said, can we get it before they take all the bran off? And they're like, nope, they sell that for animal feed. I'm like, oh my goodness. But anyway, there's a scripture for that too. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death. So anyway, they went to the miller, said, you got to put the bran and germ back in. The miller said, nope, not happening. We sell it as cattle feed. We're not losing that money. It's a very lucrative market. So it took until 1948. Now, mind you, this is early 1900s. It took until 1948 for the government to step in and mandate that they enrich the flour. Here was the mandate. You have to put the 3B vitamins and iron back in. So they put, that's crazy. So they put 4 nutrients back in for the 35, 40, who knows how many nutrients are lost. There's phytonutrients that they've never even identified and isolated. Does that look like enrichment to you? This is what opened my eyes. I'm like, that is not making this better. That's a mere fraction of what we lose. Not to mention the fiber that's lost as well. It took until 1998. Now look at this. How long is that? 50 years. They mandated that they must add folic acid now to the bread, to the flour. Why? Because for 50 years they watched the rising incidence of birth defects. And they went, it's because it's missing from the flour, the food source that used to be the most predominant food source for that nutrient. So this was a real eye-opening to me. When I see now vitamin A and D fortified milk, I know that they destroyed it, is why they're putting it back. Or calcium-enriched orange juice, they destroyed it, which is why they're putting it back. And there was a problem, or believe me, they wouldn't necessarily do it. And if this were not enough, remember I said the vitamin E and the oils are in the germ? Well, oils, you all know, if you grind something up, you're not going to strip it all away. Those oils get mixed into that flour. So they found that when the flour did oxidize, that residual oil that was in there turned yellow. Now, we cannot have white flour with yellow specks in it, can we? So they began to use a product called nitrogen trichloride to bleach the flour. Did you hear that key word? Bleach and chloride. Yes. British studies done that I read on nitrogen trichloride, they fed a group of dogs white flour. I don't know what form. I guess made animal feed out of the white flour. Get this, for a period of 2 weeks. The article I read said at the end of 2 weeks, some of the dogs had the running fits so severe that some of them died. Now, nitrogen trichloride, because of these studies causing hyperactivity, and even seizures in animals. They took nitrogen trichloride off the market, but a chlorine derivative is still being used today to bleach the flour. It's a real problem. Benzoyl peroxide is used to neutralize the flour. It's used as a flour enhancer. It destroys B vitamins. It destroys vitamin E. It's been known to cause respiratory problems. Potassium bromate, which helps to strengthen the gluten structure, which we're going to find out what gluten is. It's not a bad guy at all, but that's the stretchy substance that forms when wheat flour is hydrated, and that's what enables yeasted breads to rise. So potassium bromate strengthens that structure, and it's been known to cause liver and thyroid issues, which, wow, about 50% of women today have thyroid issues. So this is all things that our flour is now exposed to, and it doesn't matter if it's white or whole grain or whole wheat. it's all exposed to these things. So it's taken us a while to see the consequences, and here we are more than 100 years later. And supposedly, this took care of beriberi and pellagra, but I have to ask you this question. How many nervous disorders do we have in our country today? How many skin problems do we have in our country today? How about GI disturbances? How about mental insanity? We have significant amounts, so I don't know that this took care of the problem. In fact, in my studies of biochemistry, the B vitamins are a huge complex. I know there's at least 17. I don't know how many others there are. But in all my studies, they typically are in foods together. And to isolate a few out and take them by themselves actually causes more damage and more harm than good. I did a study, I was studying vitamin B1, thiamine, which is critical for carbohydrate metabolism and energy. So they gave people vitamin B1 supplements that had kind of depression and lack of energy. 2 weeks, they were great. After that, it depleted the other B vitamins and caused such an imbalance that they were worse off than when they had started. That really also opened my eyes to what could be happening here. Not to mention that these are synthetics. I met a lady, she's a customer. This is not, folic acid is not the natural form of the way it appears in food. It appears in food as folate. And there's actually a disease, I didn't know this until I met her. She cannot eat anything enriched because she can't break down the folic acid that's in enriched foods. So I have a scripture that I came across. If you haven't noticed by now, I love the Lord. I am a born-again believer in Jesus Christ. So you're going to get the Bible today because that's my jumping off place. And I find bread verses everywhere. And this one really hit me one day. Isaiah 55 verse 2 says this: "Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for what does not satisfy?" I'm like, wow, that was pretty potent. If you are like me, before, even as a food scientist, I did not know that what I was buying and feeding my family wasn't really bread. Not at all what Jesus compared himself to. Because it's not giving us life, it's taking our life, actually. It is making us sick. So that was a real eye opener to me. And then in Haggai chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, throughout the scripture, God often tells us to consider our ways. Consider your ways, it says in Haggai. It says, consider your ways and how you have fared. I think I have it written out somewhere. I can look it up. It says, consider your ways and how you have fared. I have it right here. You plant, but you harvest little. You eat, but you do not have enough. You drink, but you don't have enough. I think that describes us for sure today. We eat and eat and eat, and we're going to look at that. We drink and drink and drink because we're not drinking things like water that actually quench our thirst. We're drinking things that dehydrate us and make us thirstier. Why now do we have big gulps instead? When I was growing up, Cokes were 6-ounce bottle, and now they're this. And it says that it's 2 or 3 servings. No one shares that bottle with anybody. You drink it, right? And you get the supersized. Anyway, I digress. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And then this one really hit me. He who earns wages earns them to put them in a bag with holes in it. We are working to earn wages, and we're buying stuff that's called food in the grocery store that is maybe filling our belly, but it is making us sick. And then what do we spend the rest of our money on? Medicine and medical bills, right? To me, that is a bag with holes in it, right? So God says, consider your ways. How have you fared? So now we're going to look at how we've fared. We're going to look at the common diseases that plague America and how they're directly related to our consumption of white flour. This is section, the first part is better known as, my children called it quite affectionately, Mom's Poopy Talk, because the first disease we're going to look at is constipation. Now, some people don't consider constipation a disease, but it is actually, in my studies, one of the front dominoes that affects so many other things. And these diseases we're going to look at are directly or indirectly from the nutrients, but specifically the fiber being taken out of our flour by sifting away the bran and germ. Okay, so constipation is the first one we're going to look at. I've read that America is the most constipated nation in the world. I do not know how they came up with that statistic. I would have loved to have been on that phone call. That's all I've got to say. But listen to the definition of a disease. A disease is an abnormal condition that affects the body of an organism. I would say constipation is an abnormal condition no matter what a doctor or someone may tell you. Even though that the average American only goes once every 3 to 5 days, and that might be, so now that's considered normal, it's not normal. And it affects the whole body of an organism. So we're going to look at constipation and why it's basic to a whole host of diseases. Even back in 1982, the Health Education Council of Great Britain said this: all in all, fiber is the single most important form of food likely to be lacking in your everyday diet. How many of you heard you need to get more fiber in your diet? How many of you are like, okay, that's great. What is fiber and how do I do that? So today, before you leave, you're going to know what fiber is and what fiber does in your body. Basically, if you've ever lay awake at night, I tell people that all the time. If you ever lay awake at night, and they're like, no, it's okay. I'm weird. I do. I think of things like that. So fiber. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate that your body can't digest on its own with just your body's enzymes. And it can be soluble or known as insoluble. Okay? 3 basic functions of fiber. You ready for this? Fiber, number 1, increases the bulk of the stool. Number 2, fiber softens the stool by absorbing water. And my very, very favorite way of putting this, fiber shortens your transit time. I think some Southern woman surely came up with that. She goes, fiber shortens your transit time. Don't you just think that? I just think that's such a sweet way of saying you're going to poop every day. All right? So that's what fiber is and that's what fiber does. Soluble fiber comes mostly from fruits and vegetables, which are so good for you. Beans, legumes have soluble fiber. They work mostly for softening the stool. Grains have both soluble and insoluble fiber that are undigestible through your normal digestive system. So let's look at digestion, all right? We're going to first look at how digestion is supposed to work when we're eating real fruits, real vegetables, real meat or whatever, real bread, whole grains, beans, lots of fiber, lots of nutrients. Okay, y'all ready? All right, again, I'm a science major and I'm not an artist at all. I can hardly draw a stick figure, so I think God is very humorous that he now has me drawing. Also, it's kind of funny, when I changed my major to food science, why they make a food scientist take speech in college, I don't know. And I almost changed my major again. I was terrified of speaking in public. God has another real sense of humor. Here I am drawing and speaking. I'll never forget my first speech. It was a draw the name out of the hat as to who would go first. I went first. I got up there and I coughed and coughed and coughed and coughed. I could not get a word out of my mouth. To sit down, go get that nervous. And finally, when I heard the first person's speech, I was like, okay, I can probably do that. Okay, I can do it. And I did that, but I still get nervous every time I speak. But anyway, that was an aside. So funny, I'm going to draw. We're not going to be anatomically correct, but you'll get the picture, I think. All right? So we're going to begin with digestion here in our mouth. Chew your food. Carbohydrate digestion begins in your mouth. Actually, digestion begins when you smell food. Yesterday, I was cooking soup and getting bread, and everybody kept coming back. Oh, it smelled so good. That already tells your body food's about to come in, and that's what it means when you say, I'm salivating. You really are. Your mouth starts producing saliva. Saliva has a carbohydrate digesting enzyme known as amylase. So when you chew your food, those carbohydrates are already beginning to be broken down. It's so important. Chew your food, mix it with saliva, get those carbohydrates, that carbohydrate digestion beginning. And that's why actually if you took the time to food, notice that your food actually gets sweeter, and that's because those carbohydrates are getting broken down. So you want to chew your food. Then you're going to swallow your food. It's going to come down your esophagus here into your stomach. Now, in your stomach, for all practical purposes, carbohydrate digestion is going to stop or at least slow down because carbohydrate digestive enzymes require a more alkaline environment, whereas protein digestive enzymes require an acidic environment. Y'all with me? Okay? So the stomach, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. The stomach has these cells in the lining that produce acid so that it can bring the pH of the stomach puree is what I call it, the environment to more acidic, so those protein digestive enzymes can start their work. Okay? Also, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. The stomach has cells that produce mucus to protect it from this acid, to keep it from damaging the stomach lining. Isn't that amazing? So, again, like I said, for all practical purpose, carbohydrate digestion here. And I want to stop here. I want to back up just a minute and make a point here. There's a lot of diet information out there now really denouncing carbohydrates in our diet. Most of the world lives off of carbohydrates. Just want you to know that. Okay? They don't eat nearly the meat that America eats. I get it. The carbohydrates that are available in the grocery store, all the white bread, the Twinkies, the donuts, the biscuits, the waffles, even what's labeled whole grain. I get it. But the fact that our saliva, the very beginning of food, has a carbohydrate digestive enzyme in it, that was the way we were created, should be a pretty good indicator that we are designed to digest and break down carbohydrates. Okay? And like I said, most of the world gets most of their calories from real carbohydrates. Haiti, they eat, as Brad says, rice and beans for breakfast and beans and rice for lunch or for dinner. That's their meal. In Tanzania, just about every day, it was beans and rice or some kind of bean, some kind of rice, some kind of vegetable. Very, very, very little meat. Okay, I digress. So let's go back. We swallowed this stuff here down into our stomach. Protein digestion begins here. Carbohydrate digestion virtually stops for all practical purpose. The stomach starts churning, mixing this food with that stomach acid and those protein digestive enzymes. It churns it and churns it, breaking that protein down into amino acids or into smaller particles that can be digested further down the line. This puree is known as chyme. This puree then, when the stomach has finished its job, is shunted over into the small intestines. In the very beginning of the small intestines, you have some alkalizing minerals that are put here to now bring that very acidic environment that's coming out of the stomach. You need to bring that pH back up so that your digestive enzymes from the pancreas, is that the right? Is it E? I can never remember. No E? I didn't think so. Okay. Gallbladder shoots in bile to help emulsify the fat. The liver brings in enzymes here. And then now your carbohydrate, your fat, your protein digestion is complete or carried on, okay, to smaller and smaller particles. So here now, it starts separating out the individual nutrients that your body needs. And for all practical purposes, most of your nutrient absorption takes place from your small intestines. What the body doesn't want or recognize as a nutrient, and all of that fiber in your whole grains and your fruits and vegetables, the skins of apples, the Fiber is what makes the stalk of a celery or broccoli strong. That's your fiber. Fiber is like a toxin magnet. So as this undigested fiber passes through the small intestines, it absorbs the stuff that your body doesn't want, okay, or doesn't want to absorb, and it dumps it over here into our very large trash can known as the colon or the large intestines, okay? So now we've got undigested fiber with toxins and waste. Also just the metabolic waste. We produce waste just from the process, kind of like cooking. You got onions, you got your scraps that you throw into the trash can. So that's what's picked up here and taken over here to the colon. Now, I'm not going to say this is the first thing that happens, but one thing that happens in the colon that we don't necessarily think about, we have good organisms. So much is being said about our gut flora, our gut organisms. I don't like to call it bacteria because it's more than just bacteria there. These gut organisms, their food is undigested, that insoluble fiber, particularly of whole grains, fresh fruits, and vegetables. So these guys go, woohoo, food is coming in. We've already eaten it here, but they are eating it here in our trash can. So they begin to feed on this undigested fiber. And this process is known as gut fermentation. You sometimes don't like it. That's what gives beans their bad reputation, because they're loaded with soluble and insoluble fiber, and those organisms love it, and they go woohoo, and they produce other things besides B vitamins. Massive amount of B vitamins. I don't remember learning this in my physiology class, but I read it. I've read it now several places. I'm like, how did I miss this? It wasn't until I was teaching my kids and was reading a Christian physiology and anatomy book, and it was talking about how fearfully and wonderfully made we were, that God would put these organisms here, feed off of our trash or, off of this fiber and produce a massive amount of B vitamins. He said, without which this manufacturer, we can't get enough from just our food alone. So God put this factory in us. Fatty acids. I'm kind of cluttering my board. Fatty acids. Things like butyrate. Studies, astronomical amount of studies done right now on butyrate, that this gut is produced through this gut fermentation by these organisms. Butyrate's been known to be a powerful anti-carcinogenic agent. Powerful. Also anti-inflammatory. So many things. Look it up. There's just so many studies on butyrate. Antibiotics. They don't want the bad guys in there either. They don't want them living in their house. So they produce natural antibiotics to keep pathogenic bacteria and organisms down. Vitamin K for normal blood clotting, and on and on and on. So many powerful, important nutrients are produced with this gut fermentation. Now the colon does what the main job of the colon is, controlling the amount of water that is in our system and turning this puree. Remember, we chewed, we pureed, we now have a liquid that we shunt through. Now we dump the liquid over here. Now we got to turn that liquid back into a solid so it can be eliminated through the bowels. Does that make sense? It does this through a process known as peristaltic motion. Contract, relax, drawing water in, letting water out. How many of y'all seen a laxative commercial? I know there's one that shows you this sponge in this cup of blue water or something, and it shows you how fiber in this laxative product absorbs that water. Well, that is very much correct. So this is my visual aid. So this is my sponge. Fiber is like a sponge. I can never remember the amount of water and liquid that fiber can absorb. How many of y'all already make your bread and your muffins? And you know that you stir up your muffin batter and you come back in 5 minutes and it's much stiffer than it was before. That's because that fiber is absorbing that liquid. Or your bread dough, when you knead it, I warn you, let it be wet looking, because in 10 minutes of kneading, and that gluten develops, but that fiber is also going to absorb that extra liquid. And that's exactly what it's doing in your body, okay? So think about this. Let's think about our sponge. You haven't done dishes, you've been away for the weekend or whatever. You come home and you have a sponge on your kitchen counter. What does it look like? It's dry and shriveled up, right? So you take that sponge. What's the first thing you're going to do if you want to use it? Put it in water. what happens to the sponge? It absorbs that water and swells. Number one function of fiber, increases the bulk of the stool. So see, as that colon is drawing water in, if there is fiber there, that fiber is going to absorb that water and increase the bulk of the stool. Got it? You with me? Think about the sponge again. Dry, shriveled up sponge. You put it down in water. It absorbs the water. It swells, but it's also soft, right? Though it's bulkier, with that dry, shriveled up sponge, if you wanted to clean something with an opening this big, you couldn't even get it in there, right? But if you put that sponge down in water, it absorbs that water, it swells, but now it's soft, and you know where I'm going with that, right? Yep. We're not trying to go in, we're trying to come out. So that sponge is bulky, it's bigger, but it's soft. Number two function of fiber. You with me? All right. All before lunch. Sorry. Better than after lunch, I think, don't you? Yeah. So anyway, third function of fiber, shortening your transit time. So you put the sponge down in water, it absorbs that water, increases the bulk of the stool. With that increase, it puts pressure on the walls of the colon and stimulates the colon to go like this. You know that feeling? Stop the car. I got to find a bathroom. Whoop, I'll be right back, right? That's the urge you get when you have to eliminate. And you're going to get that urge more often as that sponge has absorbed that water and increased the bulk of the stool and put pressure on the walls of the colon. And now you have the urge to eliminate, and it passes down and can very easily pass through an orifice this big. Though it's bulky, it's very soft, and it's not hard at all to eliminate. Oh, aren't you happy? Fiber, that muffin you ate this morning, you just wait, all right? You're going to be so very happy. And after the bread, the roll this afternoon, and all the beans and barley, your gut organisms are going to be so happy. Before we leave digestion of the way our body's supposed to work, there's one more thing I want to tell you. I like this sponge because it has a green side. I think this is so amazing. It's safe for non-stick coating. I'm like, why do we need this if it really is non-stick? Because then nothing should really stick. But things do stick eventually, so we have to give it a little scrub with something that's mildly abrasive. Grain fiber is mildly abrasive. Nothing that's going to hurt your inside, especially if it's not just eating bran. The years ago, bran, because of white bread, all these all bran, cereals and things that were just bran. It wasn't mixed with the with the flour, started causing some bleeding issues. So now bran got a reputation. Oh, don't eat whole grains because they'll cause your bowels to bleed. That's not true. That cereal did have to be taken off the market because it was abrasive, because it was pure bran. But when you eat the whole grain, the bran is very gentle. And so it very gently can scrub your colon as it goes. Yeah? I'll tell y'all this analogy. I was thinking about skipping it, but I think I got time to tell you. So when I was growing up, we used iron frying pans, also aluminum. Hate to tell you, but we did. So my mom scrambled eggs in that, right? Have y'all ever scrambled eggs in a nonstick pan? What happens? You got a coating of eggs on that pan, right? So she would get out her Brillo pad, which is not very non-abrasive, but that was a hard surface. Iron or, no nonstick coating here. But now that we have nonstick coatings, we have this gentle side. So my mom would get out scrub the eggs off her pan. So here's my analogy with you. We eat solid food. We chew our food. That carbohydrate digestion starts here in the mouth, so chew your food. We swallow that food down into our stomach where carbohydrate digestion stops. These acid begins to be produced, this pepsin and all these protein digestive enzymes start breaking down those proteins. The stomach's churning this, pureeing it. This puree chyme is shunted over through the small intestines. All your digestive enzymes come into play here, breaking down that chyme into individual nutrients that are absorbed through the small intestines. That waste is dumped over here into your colon, where your colon starts contract, relax, drawing water in, letting water out. increasing the bulk of the stool, putting pressure on the walls of the colon, stimulate the colon to go like this. That's the urge you get to eliminate, and you go, stop the car, I'll be right back, let me go to the bathroom. But that soft, bulky stool can very easily pass through an orifice this big, and while it passes down and out, the green side of the sponge scrubs the eggs off your pan. All right? Y'all ready for, we're having eggs for lunch. No. I'm just kidding. Isn't that amazing, though? God did that for us every day. One good bowel movement is the absolute minimum you should have every day. And when I say good, something bulky that you know has happened, but not hurts, should be soft, okay? I'm getting real, wow. Okay, so, yeah. All right. Let's look at how most of America is dealing with our food, okay? So we're going to eat food here. We smell it. We start salivating. We eat food here. Our saliva is producing, it's got amylase, and our mouth is producing that saliva. Unfortunately, most of us are eating in a drive-thru, throwing the burgers to the back seat or gulping it. That's why they make this drink called a big gulp, so you can take one chomp and gulp it down, right? I'm thinking that's why. Chew your food, all right? But anyway, so we've compromised some digestion by not really chewing our food. But nonetheless, it comes here into our esophagus, down into our stomach. Now, we got an issue. Our stomach starts producing stomach acid to digest the protein. Our stomach lining makes mucus to protect it from that stomach acid. But do y'all know what one of the number one over-the-counter and prescription drugs is in America? Something called Prilosec, Nexium, antacids. That antacids neutralize this acid. What happens to protein digestion then? It's going to be compromised, to say the least. All right? Do you remember what... First of all, let me give you a definition of an allergy, because this has really been troubling me over the last 10 years. Why are we seeing so many allergies in this country? Do you know in Haiti, we're feeding 1,200 school children every day, and no one has ever asked us if it was gluten-free or told us that they had a gluten problem? Do you know we commonly put peanut butter on every one of them, and no one has a peanut allergy? Something's, and at first I thought, well, it must be American peanut butter. No, we're hauling American peanut butter down there. Now, I should have said this. I should have given this disclaimer at the very beginning. I am not a doctor. Nothing I'm saying today should be taken as medical advice or medical suggestions or anything like that. And I don't want to oversimplify, but here's my thought process. If you're driving down the road and your car sputters and stops and you glide off to the side, what's the first thing you look at? Your gas gauge. You don't go, ooh, I might need to call a specialist. This might be a really big problem. No, you look at your gas gauge first. That's what I'm doing today. Let's look at our gas gauge first and then go from there. I don't want to oversimplify, and I don't want to say this is the only thing that's causing issues, but here's what we need to look at. So we got an issue here. The definition of an allergy is an overreaction to an undigested something, and it's typically a protein. A milk allergy is you can't digest the protein component. An intolerance is something else. A lactose intolerance, that's the sugar in the milk. Do you understand what I'm saying? An allergy is typically you can't digest the protein component. What's happening here? Okay? And do you remember what I said the white flour is in the grain? What? Protein and starch. Gluten is it's a protein component of the grain. Well, gluten is actually a culinary term for the stretchy substance that forms when wheat flour is hydrated. When it's wet, gluten will naturally form. And it's just a stretchy substance. It's not in wheat. It is something that's formed in the flour. And since the beginning of time, wheat has been the grain of choice to make yeasted breads because of that stretchy substance that forms, so that when the yeast produces carbon dioxide, that stretchy substance can trap it, and that's what makes the bread rise. You only make yeast bread out of wheat, the wheat family. Wheat, rye, spelt, kamut, barley a little bit. Does this make sense to you? It's the gliadin portion. It's an amino acid that forms this stretchy substance. Now, true celiacs, born with the inability to digest that gliadin component, you will never be able to eat wheat bread, flour, whether it's freshly milled or not. I get it. Less than 1% of Americans have that genetic disease. Not at all what we're seeing today. Okay? Could this be part of the issue? Not to mention the fact that white flour and white bread is protein and starch, or gluten and starch if you want to say that. That's what it is. Never intended to be eaten without the bran and germ, just like the bran and germ was never intended to be eaten without all the components. Is this kind of making sense here? So maybe this is why we have so many food sensitivities. Okay? We've got the heavy use of antacids and other issues. I'm going to read you something in a minute, but we'll get all the way over to the gut here. So this puree, it has a little trouble here completely pureeing because we didn't break it down here. So we're causing issues all the way down the line. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so an allergy is typically described as it's typically an adverse reaction to a protein component of whatever it's come in contact with. Typically, not 100%, but typically it's a protein component. Whereas an intolerance, when you say I have an intolerance, the simplest one, the most common one we know of is a lactose intolerance. Well, lactose is the milk sugar. So an intolerance is typically to some other component of that food. Could be sugar, it could be whatever. But an allergy is typically you can't break down the protein component. And I am just offering this as a suggestion. We've got a protein digestive problem going on here, okay? Or we're compromising it. So nonetheless, this is shunted over into the small intestines. So now we call on our pancreas to bring in enzymes, carbohydrate, fat, protein digestive enzymes, the gallbladder, if we still have it. And I understand emergency surgeries, but all too often, just take out the gallbladder, okay? It does a job. It gives us bile. It's a storage for bile that helps us emulsify fats. Liver brings in enzymes as well. Now, think about the pancreas here for a minute. If it's having trouble producing insulin because of the high sugar we're eating, you think it might also have trouble giving us the enzymes we need. Just a thought. So we might have some digestion problems going on here, breaking down our food into individual nutrients. But nonetheless, what few nutrients are in the food that we're getting from the grocery store, the processed food, what few nutrients are absorbed through the small intestines. Now, I want to say something about fiber here. Fiber is known as a cheap belly filler. Fiber is slow to break down. I should have said that in the last. If you don't have fiber, the stomach empties very quickly because it doesn't have to churn up and try to break down that fiber into smaller particles. So you're going to sit here for a while with more filling, more satiation, more satisfaction. And that was one of the big things I noticed when we started doing the bread. You know, when you homeschool your kids and they're there all day, every day, they eat, especially as they get teenagers, and someone's always rumbling in the kitchen. Well, we ate big breakfast. I mean, breakfast was our main meal of the day, and it was usually around 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And usually it was grits and eggs and bread or pancakes made from freshly ground flour and maybe even a meat. I mean, it was a bit, and fruit typically. So it was a big breakfast. And then our typical routine was everybody go make your bed, do your chores, and get everything kind of straightened up. And then we'd come back in an hour and we'd do school. Well, before bread, I would be doing school with the young ones. Guess what the teenagers were doing? They were in the kitchen getting food, and we had just gotten it all cleaned up. Hadn't even been an hour. After bread, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd have breakfast. After bread, they would come to me at about 2. No one's been in the kitchen. No one's been looking for a snack. And they would say, are we going to have lunch? Because they weren't hungry until 4 or 5 hours later. Fiber is a cheap belly filler. Everybody used to always say, I bet you spend all your time in the kitchen. Nope, I actually my kids spend less time in the kitchen. And they even commented to me one time when we started traveling, fellowshipping with other families on the road. They would go play games in their hotel room, and the adults would fellowship. They'd come back and they go, they eat all the time, because they would be eating chips and popcorn and pizza and Cokes and sodas. Not that my kids didn't like it, but they weren't hungry because they had eaten the bread. So the bread is filling. What did Jesus say? I am the real bread of life. He who comes to me shall be satisfied. You're going to be satisfied. You're going to be full longer. I went off. Woo! Okay, so this puree is shunted through our small intestines, and here's another reason why we crave food, because the stuff that we call food that we're eating is so devoid of nutrients that our body is not only getting not full because it doesn't have fiber, but because it doesn't have nutrients that it needs, we're craving things. We don't have energy, so we're craving sugar. We have whatever. We crave things with calcium. If you ever crave peanut butter, it's probably you need calcium. If you ever crave chocolate, you need magnesium. I could go on and on. There's different foods that are a good indication of what nutrients your body needs. And so that's why we can eat and eat and eat, and we're never satisfied. Remember what that scripture said? Put a knife to your throat, lest you be given to gluttony. So that's why we can eat a whole bag of cookies, right? We're going to serve y'all 2 little cookies for lunch. You couldn't eat a whole bag. You might want more than those 2, but I promise you could not eat a dozen or 2 dozen. You can eat 2. But do you understand what I'm saying? We're craving, we're never satisfied, so we're eating and overeating, and we're very gluttonous. All right, so this chyme is dumped into our large intestine known as the colon. Good organisms need to feed on what? That undigested fiber. There's no fiber there. So our organisms don't get a meal today. We ate tons, but we aren't feeding them. So guess what? We lose that B vitamin factory, which what did that Christian scientist, not like, that's the wrong way. Not that religion, but the Christian physiologist. There we go. What did he say? You can't get enough from just even if you were eating a perfect diet. God put this in there, but we lost that. We lost vitamin K. We lost those good fatty acids. We lost that production of natural antibiotics in our gut because we're not giving these organisms food to live on. Not to mention the fact the heavy use of antibiotics has killed these guys. Now, don't misunderstand me. There is a time and place for antibiotics. They've saved lives. I get that. But they're way overused. They're way overdone. And you must understand, we are killing the good with the bad. And this is something that greatly concerned me about the crisis that we've seen for the last 2 years. This heavy use of hand sanitizers. You may be thinking, well, I never have taken antibiotics orally. Let me just tell you something. Transdermal absorption is much more effective than taking it through the mouth. Through the mouth, it breaks down and you only get part of what you take. You do it transdermally and you get all of what you're putting on your hands. So some of this has caused a germophobia, and it's not necessarily a good thing. Wash your hands. I get it. I use some natural ones when I go to places like Haiti and Tanzania. I get it. There's a time and place. But I'm very concerned with the overuse of antibiotics that is killing the good organisms along with the bad. In fact, that's when I began to study allergies, and what was happening there is, I graduated from Georgia with a food science degree, but some years ago I wanted to kind of consolidate my studies, not just study a little here, a little there. So I enrolled in Trinity School of Natural Health and got my certification to be a nutrition counselor. So I kind of was helping some people. There was a young man, a young married man. He came to see me, and he was like, I've never been allergic to anything in my life. And he said, and now all of a sudden I can't eat anything. And he gave me this list of all these things, cherries and this and that, and all these things he couldn't eat that he has this adverse reaction to. Here's what caught my attention. He said, it all started when I had a kidney infection. Now, yeah, you gotta, that's a serious, you gotta take antibiotics. But the first round didn't work, so he took a second round. The second round didn't work, so he took a third round. He said, by the third round now, I'm allergic to everything, and I'm having all these reactions. And that's when I began to think about this relationship as well as here. Because here, you're not breaking down proteins very well. They get dumped here. Guess what? Another thing that yeast organisms actually break down undigested protein and help it get eliminated or absorbed correctly. So do you see how important both of these are? This is a problem. Whereas in countries like Haiti, they may be undernourished slightly, but they are eating fresh fruits and vegetables and probably not washed. And yeah, so they're getting exposed to things, that are helping them in some ways. So I want to read you this before I go on. And just listen very carefully to me here for just a minute. This is by a well-known doctor. I'm not going to name his name, but it's someone that I respect in a lot of ways. But here's what is happening today. We're taking truth and making wrong conclusions. Listen, and you'll see what I'm saying. Okay, so this is going to confirm what I've said here. Damage to the gastrointestinal tract from the overuse of antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs. I didn't mention Advil and Aleve, things like any aspirin-related anti-inflammatory. Did you know every time you take one for a headache, and you may need one, causes some internal intestinal bleeding? Just does. All right? But the heavy use on and on is going to cause damage to the gastrointestinal tract. Acid-blocking drugs like Prilosec and Nexium, combined with our low-fiber, high-sugar diet, listen carefully. Did you hear what I said? Heavy use antibiotics, Prilosec, Nexium, antacids, anti-inflammatories, low fiber, high sugar, that's what we're talking about here, leads to the development of celiac disease. Now, not genetic, this is the non-genetic celiac disease, and gluten intolerances or sensitivity, and the resultant inflammation. I agree, right? Isn't that what I just told y'all? Heavy use antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, Prilosec, Nexium, low fiber, high sugar leads to this problem. Listen to the conclusion. That is why the elimination of gluten and food allergens can be a powerful way to prevent or reverse chronic diseases. Nowhere in there did I hear that gluten caused this problem. Unless you're celiac, yes, it's going to cause the problem, okay? Did you hear what he said? Cause the problem. So why don't we fix those problems, those dependence on those problems? And then he goes on to say, the biggest problem is wheat. I didn't hear wheat listed in that causes these issues. And people that have sensitivities, not true celiac, most everyone we've met that had severe adverse reactions, so they said when they ate anything with gluten in it, which means Twinkies, donuts, bagels, muffins, even what's labeled whole grain bread, you need to read the label. It has the third or fourth ingredient is typically gluten flour, which is the white flour. Every one of these people that think they can't tolerate gluten have come back to us and tell us not only can they tolerate freshly milled flour, they actually feel better and they get better. I think one of the best testimonies I've ever heard was my son that had the bakery for years. He would do the farmers markets, and he had a mom would come, and he actually started making a gluten-free bread, and for those that needed it. First of all, though, he said it always intrigued them that people would come to his table and go, do you have anything gluten-free? And I can only eat gluten-free while they were eating something that was definitely not gluten-free, a donut or, it was just kind of interesting. But anyway, mother came to him, wanted to buy the gluten-free bread, and she goes, my daughter, yours is the best gluten-free bread there is, but she really doesn't love it, and she just wants a sandwich. And she was 10, I think, years old, 12 years old at the time. And she said, but if she eats anything, any store-bought bread, she doubles over, throws up, has pain, can't do it. So my son explained to her, we mill the wheat fresh, we don't put any extra gluten in, everything's there, blah, blah, blah. He explains everything to her. She goes, you know what? I'm going to try it. She just wants a sandwich. If she gets sick, then I know to never not give it to her again. The next week at the farmer's market, this little 12-year-old girl came running up to my son's table. Mr. Dave, I love your bread. I ate a sandwich every day and not one single stomach ache. This was freeing for her. This is what I mean by physical captive. She was held physical captive by something that God never intended her to eat or have. And if we just went back to his way of eating and doing, it changed it. And I spoke at a homeschool show in Florida, and the same thing. And a mom came up. I happened to mention gluten in a pressure cooking class. Who knows why I went off on that tirade? Well, I do know why. Because it grieves me, the anti-grain, anti-gluten propaganda that's being passed around today. And interestingly enough, and I'm not meaning to bash anyone here, but all our business struggled. Our bakery closed because we couldn't survive the gluten-free anti-grain propaganda. But in 2020, when all of this COVID started, everybody was in here buying wheat. And they said, oh, we went gluten-free. But they didn't care anymore because grain is storable and it's a reliable food. So, but anyway, I was telling you, this lady, I happened to mention it. And she saw me. I just happened to be here a couple of months later. And she said, I just got to tell you something. My son was on about 10 medications, and I sat in your class, and you explained what gluten was. She goes, I came back, I bought a mill, we started making bread. Not only can he eat this bread, he's off of just about every medication that he was on because it's healing. So I think it's a little over 60% of people in this country are self-diagnosed that they have to go off of gluten. But most of it is, you have to understand what's in the store is protein and starch, or if you want to call it gluten and starch, if that's what you want to call it. So, and it's everywhere. And there are some severe gluten allergies. I went down to the radio station to record, and there was a man that had to be hospitalized because he took an Adelle or something that the gelatin has some gluten in it. Which that's the other thing. People are taking these medications, and you don't know that. And he seriously has a gluten problem. So I digress. But anyway, we got to poop now, right? Well, or try to, because this is no fiber in our diet. We're getting there. All right. So now look what happens. So we've lost this. We've lost our good B vitamins, our fatty acids, our vitamin K, our natural antibiotics. But this poop is dumped. This trash is dumped here. So it's this liquid waste, no fiber there, no sponge there. So now the colon is going to try to take this liquid waste and turn it into a solid material. But there's no sponge, right? So there's not going to be absorbing any water. The colon's just going to let that water back out. So what's going to happen to the sponge? It's going to dry and shrivel up, kind of. So you're going to... No swelling, no increasing the bulk of the stool, no urge to eliminate, right? So you're going to eat breakfast today, lunch today, dinner today, no absorbing water, no increasing the bulk of the stool, no urge to eliminate. No pressure put on the walls of the colon, no urge to eliminate, right? So you get up tomorrow. You eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, no fiber absorbing that water, no increasing the bulk of the stool, no pressure put on the walls of the colon, no peristaltic motion, no urge to eliminate. So you eat, you know where I'm going? National average, from what I understand, was 3 to 5 days. It was not uncommon for me to go 5 days without eliminating. Horrible feeling. But this is what I hear. Again, I didn't make the phone call. So I don't know, but that's what I hear. Also, this might be where you start discussing your bowel habits with whoever you're eating with. And that always puzzled my children. They were like, why? Why do old people talk about bowel habits at the mealtime? And I'm like, cause you sit down with somebody you're eating with and you hadn't gone in 3 to 5 days, and you're like, should I really be eating this? And then you tell them that you haven't pooped, that nothing's come out that you've eaten for the last 3 days. So that's why you do it. Yep. It's the only thing I can figure, right? So anyway, no urge to eliminate. But usually by this time, you're like, this ain't right, and I'm not feeling so good. I'm bloated, got some pressure. Something's got to happen. So you look at everybody, and you go, do not bother me. I'm going in. And I'm not coming out till something comes out, right? So you go in there, and it's why they have book racks in the bathroom, because you can now read. One time I said Gone with the Wind and did not realize what I had said. But that you could read the whole thing, your whole daily Bible reading guide, before anything decides to come out. You push, you strain, you rip, you tear, pull out hemorrhoids, rip your rectum, your fissure, right? It's painful because there's no sponge there to soften that where it can easily come out an orifice this big. Pressure of trying to push out and eliminate a hard stool. Typically blow up little balloons, or you can. Common cause of something known as diverticulosis or diverticulitis when you have a flare-up. Now you got these little pockets. I looked up the Latin word for diverticuli. Do you know what it is? Wayside house of ill frame. I just think that's funny. It's not funny. That's why they named them this. These are houses that aren't supposed to be there, and they have doors. So now you got poop sitting in here for 3 to 5, fecal material, 3 to 5 days, gets caught in this door. And then you eat something, and the colon's trying to do its job, contract, relax, and you know why you can't eat strawberries or blueberries? Because they have little tiny seeds that get hung up in there because they're not digestible, and they are abrasive, so your colon's doing this, and that's rubbing. I called it, when I was growing up, I grew up on the coast, we went to the beach, sand in your bathing suit. That was horrible. You come home with a rough, raw, that's what's happening here. You got sand in your bathing suit. Now you've got bleeding bowels, bleeding issue going on, which the treatment is stool softeners, laxatives, antibiotics, and if you can't keep it under control that way, let's go in and we'll cut this section out. But if you don't fix this problem, guess what's going to happen? It's going to move on down the line. Diverticulitis. Appendicitis used to be the most common emergency abdominal surgery. It's directly related to backed up fecal material backing up into your appendix and causing an infection because fecal material is not supposed to be in there. And let's just cut it out because it's a leftover from our fish days. I'm here to tell you I was never a fish. Never, never, never. And neither were you nor our ancestors from however long ago. What they're finding, one study I read said that it was the developing babies in the womb was their digestive and elimination system or digestive system. Now, some more recent material I've read is that it's a sack of good organisms. It's kind of like the reservoir, and it releases them when you need them. So to take that out, if you've got a horrible infection, I get it. Emergency, you got to do what you got to do. But it is a problem. Hiatal hernia, where part of the stomach comes up into the thorax here. Again, it's believed to be from the pressure of trying to eliminate a hard stool. What did I tell you about constipation? It is most definitely a disease, an abnormal condition, and it affects the whole body of the organism. So, we do all this. We finally do push something out. We strain. But there's no green side of the sponge, so we don't scrub the eggs off our pan. So those eggs build up. And they build up. And they build up. And they build up. Until the colon says, we got to get this stuff out of here. And it's aggravated now that you got this stuff in there. And so what does it do? Contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax. You're drawing massive amounts of water in, and you feel the urge to eliminate because you've got this going on 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 times a day. Something known as chronic diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, call it whatever you want to call it. But that's what's happening there, is now you've got an advanced stage of chronic constipation. Here's the glorious thing about God and His creation, that fiber, because I'll never forget when we first started out, I would do shows and I'd take bread around the vending hall. Have some bread, it'll make you poop, you know. And this one guy goes, I already go 6 times a day, I don't want this. And this will fix that too. Because fiber will absorb that extra water and it'll get your bowels firming up and cleaning the eggs off your pan. Only God can create something like that. So, So I'm like, nope, it'll fix that. I'll never forget sitting at a softball game. Softball coach's wife of my daughter's team, chain smoking, Diet Coke drinking, talking very loudly about her bowel habits, openly, behind home plate, talking about how she goes 5, 6 times a day. She says, like turning on a water faucet. See what I mean? When you got troubles, you start talking about it openly. You don't care. Talk about poop. It doesn't matter. And she said, she was going to the hospital a couple of weeks to be scoped. I heard her, and I try not to talk poop out in public with my kids because they get real embarrassed. They're like, oh gosh, Mom, But I was sitting in the stands with a customer. Her daughter was on the same team, and all of a sudden she goes, you need to talk to her. She'll fix, you can need to talk to her. So I went down and I talked to her, and I think this was on Thursday night. They had practice that weekend. I took her a dozen muffins and a loaf of bread. And I said, here, try this. Remember I told you her diet plan? Chain smoker, diet, drink. So the following week, 2 or 3 days later, I took her practice. I took her another dozen muffins and a loaf of bread. At that practice, she said, what's in this bread? She said, they're still like turning on a water faucet, except one is kind of normal, is starting to firm up. This went on for 2 weeks. By the end of 2 weeks, taking her a dozen muffins and a loaf of bread, she said, my bowel habits are completely normal. Firmed up, no more cramping, no more turning on a water faucet, completely normal. Nothing else she changed in her diet. I do not recommend chain smoking and diet sodas, just so you know, but hey, add the bread. And then another, I think one of the most powerful testimonies was a customer of ours, missionary, her and her husband, her mom, I used to say older, but that was about 10 years ago, and I'm the age that her mother was now. So, she told me her mother had had bleeding bowels for years, chronic diarrhea, couldn't leave her house. She was on steroids, which you're not supposed to be on for an indefinite amount of time. Every time they tried to pull her off, she would have a flare-up, bleeding so bad. And she goes, Sue, my mother cannot leave the house. She cannot sleep through the night because of having to get up to go to the bathroom. And she cannot be that far away from the toilet. So she said, the doctor said maybe go gluten-free. This was when gluten-free was kind of coming out. So we looked at that, and our ministry was going to give her, mom was on very fixed income. They were missionaries. Give her a meal. And she said, if you do the meal, I can do the grain. So we started talking about gluten-free, and she goes, I don't know how to do this. And I only got 2 weeks to be with her before we go back. And she goes, I'm just going to take good old red wheat. 2 weeks. She said by the end of 3 or 4 or 5 days, her mother was sleeping through the night, no more bowel issues. By the time she left 2 weeks, her mother and her father, who had blood sugar issues, were out raking the yard, cleaning everything back to normal. She had her life back. It was so severe, the neighbor came over to speak to them and said, I thought y'all had passed away because I never saw y'all. I'm like, you just figured this out? Anyway, but that's a whole nother story that we don't go over and check on our neighbors. She had her life back from changing to the bread. That's amazing to me. Now, so we get this situation going on. So we get irritable bowel, spastic colon, chronic diarrhea. Now, what is this? Trash, right? Garbage. If you're not going to take the trash out here, these toxins, this waste is sitting in your bowels, sitting in your colon. So guess what happens? they get absorbed into your body because they're sitting there. Okay? Toxins start getting into your system. One of your body's response to toxins is to make mucus. Mucus, so you can blow it out your nose or cough it up. This was the last connection I made to the bread and constipation, was my sinus congestion. I had no idea it was related to my constipation and toxins not being taken out of my system. Is that amazing? Did you ever make that connection, that just not pooping causes this buildup of sinus congestion? Okay? But what do we do for sinus congestion? Because we're so smart in this country and we treat symptoms, right? We take an antihistamine. What does an antihistamine do? Dries it up right there, right? So you still got the toxin. You didn't get it out of your body. So now your immune system, your adrenal system, all these systems are trying to deal with stuff, with garbage that it could have taken out the first day. Right? Yep. So this is amazing. And I believe this is one reason that my kids and I started living and seeing a healthier us. Just our overall health. Also, when you're constipated, you don't have energy. You're grumpy, to be honest. And you're lethargic because you're carrying, what's going to say. Anyway, do you hear what I'm saying? Yeah. I want to tell you one other story. Two things, because we're going to take a break here in just a few minutes, and I'm right on time. I'm so excited. That doesn't happen very often. This is a miracle of God, kind of like parting the Red Sea. Okay. So I'll never forget. Someone had given me a CD, and it was actually from a vitamin company, and it was a nutritional CD promoting the use of these vitamins and stuff. And it was interesting, but the woman teaching was an oncologist. And I remember where I was driving on I-10 listening to this. It was actually a cassette. I almost pulled over and just rewound and listened to it again because it was so amazing. Here's what she said. Fatty toxins are typically stored. So if you don't deal here or wherever, they're stored in your fatty tissue, right? That's why when you fast, you'll sometimes get a headache because those fats are getting broken down because you're not using carbohydrates for energy. So you'll get a headache because of those toxins being released. Here's what blew me away. Toxins are stored in your fatty tissue. Fatty tissue in a man is your prostate. Fatty tissue in a woman is your breast. And she said one of the main contributors to breast and prostate cancer, she said this, not me, constipation. And these hormones sitting here when they could have been taken out. That's pretty significant right there. Like I said, not trying to oversimplify, but let's look at the gas gauge first and think about what we're doing and start getting the trash taken out every day. One other story. There's so much being said about detoxifying these days and going on a detox cleanse and taking all these herbs. Best way, eat bread and poop tomorrow. I mean, that is the best way to detoxify every day. We raised puppies, golden retrievers, and puppies and the mom typically have worms because she's cleaning up all their stuff and licking them and cleaning them. Our golden retrievers ate table scraps and bread, and one time when she was pregnant, she got in the house and ate my rising loaves of bread, pulled the pan. Anyway, she must have really needed that, but yeah. They never had worms. That's pretty interesting. The vet couldn't believe it. But one other thing I want to tell you, tonsils. Let's talk about your tonsils for a minute. When I was a senior in high school, they wanted to take my tonsils out because they were so inflamed. My two youngest children, Olivia and Lydia, they got whooping cough. I did not immunize my two younger children, and there was a scourge or whatever you want to call it, rounds of whooping cough going around when they were young. Lydia was 4, Olivia was only a few months old. So they got whooping cough, and it was, I'm going to say, it was a little disarming. But so after several weeks of them coughing up towels full of mucus, I did take her to our regular doctor, and he said, oh, it's probably the ragweed that's blooming. Now, this is a child that's never been congested a day in her life. Lydia and Olivia are now almost, well, I don't know how old. One of them's 26 this year. I don't remember how. 92. What would that mean? Oh, she'll be 30 this year. So 30 and 26. They've never had an antihistamine or decongestant a day in their life. They were conceived and born after bread. All right. So anyway, so I'm like, I don't think that's it. So finally, I took them to the amazing Dr. Denmark, who helped develop the whooping cough vaccination. And I'm like, if anybody knows what this is, she can help me, because somebody told me, we were out somewhere and went, I think that's whooping cough. So I took them. But here's what I want to leave you with. So she went to examine. Do y'all know who Dr. Denmark is? She lived to be 114, I think. She treated many children. Saw many children. So she's examining Lydia, who was 4 years old, and she looked, and I'm pretty distraught, right? This had been weeks of this stuff going on. And she goes, her tonsils are almost gone. And I'm like, I was thinking bad thing. And I'm like, whoa, what do you mean? And she said, well, your tonsils are your first line of defense. They're a baby's little immune system. They're born with virtually no immune system except their tonsils. Everything comes into their mouth, into their body. She said, so your tonsils are little sulfur sacs, and that's their first line of defense. And she goes, but as their immune system develops and gets stronger and stronger and stronger, your tonsils should atrophy and go away. I mean, they're still there if you need them, but she said they should shrivel up. And she goes, hers are virtually gone. And she looked at me. This is a lady that's seen thousands of children. She looked at me and she goes, you must be doing something right. And we've been now doing the bread for a little over 4 years. She said, I've never seen a child this young whose tonsils were atrophied. And several years later, my kids were going to camp and they had to have a physical. So I took them all, five of them that were going to Dr. Denmark. She looked at them all and she goes, none of them have their tonsils. And she goes, this is just such a healthy bunch of kids. I've just never seen this many kids. And she sees a lot of families, a lot of big families. And she looked at me. Now, the first time when she told me you must be doing something right, I was just so distraught by everything, I didn't think of anything. But that day she looked at me and she goes, you must be doing something right. And I looked at her and I said, I mill my own grain, I make my own bread, and I feed my children real food. And she put her arm around me, this 100-year-old lady, and said, honey, you need to go make disciples out of other people. And I said, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And so, yeah, that's my amazing tonsil story. And interestingly enough, I've never been to the doctor to have my tonsils looked at. But about 4 years ago or something, I had a plugged ear, and I just thought I was getting old because I kept going, I can't hear out of this ear. You'll have to talk out of this one. Finally, I decided, because then I had ringing, and I went to the doctor, and they said, an ear doctor, and she goes, you're completely plugged with wax. I mean, it was whatever. Anyway, but then, so she said, okay, I need to look at your throat and just see some other things. She looked in there, and she went, She goes, have you had your tonsils removed? I was like, no. And why? And she goes, because they're not there, but yet they're kind of there, but they're not there, so it doesn't look like you have. I'm like, I got my own tonsil story now. How about that? So, yeah. All right, we're going to take a little break, but I want to leave you with this quote. I'm going to read several quotes here today, but this one, none of these are books about milling your flour. This was one of my courses that I had to take in my nutrition class. Putting it all together, the new orthomolecular nutrition. This is by Dr. Abram Hoffer. Dr. Abram Hoffer was known to he would treat disease nutritionally and had outstanding results. Again, it is not a book about flour milling. It's about a book about using nutrients to treat disease therapeutically. But I thought this was so interesting. We'll get ready for lunch with this ending. Food technologists look upon agricultural produce as a source of raw material, right? Brandon germ, source of raw material from which artifact components are extracted and recombined into foods, listen to this, they can persuade the public to like and to eat. The reason they have to color and flavor it is because they've extracted all the good stuff out of it. Now they got to persuade you to buy it and like it and eat it. The fact that that was my own. I'm back to the quoting now. The fact that these products are deficient in essential nutrients does not concern them. For example, the technological change from home ground whole wheat flour to the commercial white loaf removed a wholesome food able by itself to sustain life. The nutritionally valuable bread was replaced with an easily marketable, palatable product designed to be taste tempting, not to maintain health by providing sound nutrition. Food technologists may then replace only a few of the multi-nutritional substances removed and label their product enriched. This is the same thing as being held up at gunpoint on a dark street and ordered to strip naked. The thief takes your clothes and your valuables, notices your shivering embarrassment, then returns your underwear and $1.50 to take the bus home. Do you feel enriched? I don't think I could have said it better myself. Couple of questions that I want to address before we jump into the rest of the information that I want to share. Flour, when it's milled. Well, first of all, several of you were asking about my grain mill. I won't take the time to demonstrate now, but if you're interested and you want to hang out a few minutes after class, I do want to get through the information and we'll try to finish on time. So this is my grain mill. Basically, you put the grain here and it shoots the flour over into the hopper here. The grain mill is the WonderMill. This is my favorite electric mill. There are other mills out there. We carry the WonderMill and the Nutrimill. It's steel milling heads. It will grind any kind of dry grain or bean into flour very fast. It's $289, $289.95. Best investment in my health that I've ever made. So that's that. Once the flour is milled, like I said, the oxidation happens fairly quickly. And when I say quickly, not 10 minutes. I mean, yes, it started just like the apple starts turning dark. But someone heard me speak one time and thought she said they milled in the basement. And they ran upstairs real quick and got their bread baked. Not like that. But once the bread is baked, the nutritional loss is minimal. So you want to mill your flour when you're ready to bake your bread or your muffins or your pancakes. And when I demonstrate it, you'll see just how easy it is. I mean, literally, I turn it on, pour the grain in, and it comes out flour. By the time I have my oil and honey and egg and milk and whatever in my bowl or my mixer, it's ready to go. We do sell the finest mixer in the world that, for me, made bread making for my family very, very easy and very doable. I made 6 loaves of bread twice a week when all of my children were at home, and that was just the bread. We had muffins, we had pancakes, we had whatever in between all of that. So there was a lot of bread making going on in my house. Plus I catered weddings and events too. So yes. Once the bread is baked, the nutritional loss is minimal. So like I said, it's that raw flour. Any canners in here? Think of blanching vegetables. You stop that enzymatic ripening and oxidation before you freeze it. So that's what you kind of do when you bake the bread. I think of it like that. The shelf life of the bread, so if you let it completely cool before you bag it or package it, it can sit on your counter or freezer. Do not put it in the refrigerator. Of course, unless it has cheese or meat or something that has to be refrigerated, then yes. But mostly you don't want to refrigerate yeasted breads. That dries them out. So counter or freezer. On the counter in winter months, I've had it there for a week, if it lasted that long, But it should, just depends. If it's warm and I bagged it too quickly, it might mold more quickly. But its mold is the biggest thing. It's just like anything else. The flour, once it's been milled, research that I have read talked about 3 days. You've lost a significant amount of vitamins, minerals. Freezing it, we know that that stops some oxidation, like of oils, like nuts. If you freeze nuts, they'll last. But we also know you freeze or refrigerate apples and they still turn dark. So I've wanted over the years to get it nutritionally tested to see, at day 1, day 2, but I was told that was way too expensive to do that. But so I don't know the answer to that question. It is still going to be the best flour you could possibly buy. When we adopted our sons from Latvia, I took flour with me, milled, because I didn't want to take my mill there. But now on shorter trips, my mill goes with me a lot of places. But I would still, if that's your only option, if someone else is milling it for you, or we do mill small amounts here for people to try, then I would say put it in the refrigerator or the freezer. But there was a German rat study done, and I don't want to get too long-winded here because I really want to get through the information, but this is important. There was a German rat study done where they had 5 groups. They fed one group flour that was freshly milled, the second group bread made from that freshly milled flour. The third group was flour that had been held for, I can't remember if it was 14 days. It's been years since I read the study. The fourth group was bread made from that flour that had been held for a certain amount of days. And then the last group was white flour. Only the first 2 groups thrived. The rest did not. So that tells me that you're losing something in those days of holding that. I do want to talk a minute about wheat quickly. Just so you know, contrary to what you may have read, wheat is not genetically modified in this country. Years ago, I believe it was 1960, a man won awards for developing what is called the dwarf wheat. It's a shorter plant. He developed this for countries with poor soil and growing conditions, but they needed food. Wheat is bred by traditional crossbreeding methods, wheat with other wheats, to get better qualities of wheat. Yes, they bred it to get higher yields, but they bred it to be a shorter plant, so the nutrients that it was getting would be put in producing the grain instead of a big plant. If you've ever gardened, they tell you don't over fertilize your tomato plants or your garden plants or even your flowers, because what you'll get is a big bushy plant without getting flowers. And that's kind of what was done here. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the dwarf wheat. It is not genetically modified. I'm sorry, it's getting loud out there. It's just not. There is genetically modified seed that was developed by the powers that be. Trials were done. It was never approved to go any further, and it was stopped in supposedly 2005. There have been renegade GMO plants found in certain farmers, and they sued, and they've gotten a big settlement. So America is one of the largest exporters of wheat in the world, and there are countries that we export to that will not allow genetic modification. So our farmers resist it. So that doesn't mean we just sit back and let it happen. Corn is very genetically modified. Soybeans are very genetically modified, but wheat is not. And we've talked about gluten and what gluten is. It's just that stretchy substance. It is not a bad guy. It's not something that they put in wheat. And in fact, Dr. Corsada, I can't remember what university he's from, he studied seed banks, seeds of wheat dating back 100 years. There's relatively no difference in the protein content of those seeds and what would develop gluten than the seeds that are today. It is not the wheat. It is what is done to the flour. Okay? So, yeah. All right? We good with that? I think there was another question, but I can't remember what that was. But hopefully we'll touch on it. Real quick, I didn't get to cancer. I'm just going to touch on, we talked a little bit about prostate and breast cancer, but several years ago I was reading some information, and there was a prominent biochemist that did extensive research, and what he found and what he concluded after all his research was that the reason we were seeing the rising incidence of cancer is that Americans were no longer eating the foods that had vitamin B17 in them naturally. Do you know what those foods are? Seeds, grains, and seeds, and beans, seeds. Vitamin B17 is a protector of the seed, and it has a cyanide component that is known to be anti-tumor. And it typically, when it's broken down, vitamin B17 is the vitamin. You may know it by its synthetic name as Laetrile. The cancer treatment legislated illegal to be used in this country because it has a cyanide component. And so I don't know if y'all remember when I was growing up, I remember this big thing about apple seeds being poisonous. Yeah, if you ate like a bushel of apple seeds, you would die of cyanide poisoning. But I've not chowed down on that. When I say a bushel, that was an exaggeration. But, so seeds have this, but it's the cyanide component that's broken down that they decided would poison you. Well, it actually shows anti-tumor, that it would break down tumor cells and not normal cells. So this is an issue with cancer. So we didn't talk about, not the only one. I think there's plenty of others, and I have my own testimony of cancer. And there's emotional and spiritual roots to disease as well that we need to look at. Not today. Diabetes, when we talked about digestion, fiber is broken down much more slowly and slows the release of sugar into your bloodstream. Grains and beans, of course, are a carbohydrate, but when fiber is there, more slowly broken down, those sugars are released more slowly. So guess what? It gives you a more steady release of energy, but at the same time, you don't have those spikes of sugar being released into your bloodstream. And then what does your body do? It says insulin, so insulin's produced, and then you have a drop. And so now you're what's called hypoglycemic. Your blood sugar's gone too low. So this is where, when that blood sugar's dropped too low, this is where you're at the candy machine or whatever. You're getting candy or soda or coffee or something like that to get that blood sugar back up. If you could get over that little hump, your body would produce something called glucagon, which would bring your blood sugar back up. But we don't. We eat that Coke or candy bar, shoots our blood sugar back up, insulin's overproduced, our blood sugar drops. So do you see, we go like this day in and day out, and now our pancreas finally, like they says, my mother used to say, I'm just plumb wore out. We wear out our pancreas. It can't keep up with the demand. So that's one simple. It's not the only problem with diabetes. I'm sure there's other things. But Dr. James Anderson, he did extensive research on a high carbohydrate and low and high protein and high carbohydrate and high fiber and low protein diet. And he took 16, I think it was, or 18 insulin-dependent diabetics into the hospital, put them on this diet to monitor them. What's the normal diabetic diet? High protein, low carb, right? But he reversed it, except the carbohydrates were all fresh fruits and vegetables and real whole grain bread, low protein. 16 of the 18 came out of the hospital off of insulin. Yeah. So this is a problem. And a lot of people, I can't eat bread because I have blood sugar issues. And yet if they were eating real bread, they would find that their blood sugar would stabilize. I realize sometimes there is damage done to the pancreas, so there's more involved here. But I've talked to numerous diabetics that either greatly reduced their medication or were able to come off of their medication and noticed their own. When they ate pizza out or a white flour bagel, their blood sugar shot up. Whereas if they ate the bread made from freshly ground flour, their blood sugar stabilized. Okay? I'm going over my notes here to see if I left anything out. We talked about sugar cravings. You crave sugar because you're eating sugar. And sugar depletes your body of those B vitamins. It actually, one thing you may not make the correlation. Sugar and caffeine do two things. Cause your body to produce adrenaline. Caffeine causes your adrenal gland to produce adrenaline. You know what adrenaline is, right? That's your fight or flight. You either going to do a magnificent feat or you're going to hit the road running, and you're going to be able to outrun whoever's after you. So that's adrenaline. There was a study done where they fed children the equivalent of 2 cupcakes for breakfast. Now you may be going, who would feed their child 2 cupcakes? Well, a bowl of Fruity Pebbles or Cocoa Puffs or whatever breakfast cereal they're eating. They would probably be better off if they ate nothing than eating some of the breakfast foods they're eating. So they fed these children the equivalent of 2 cupcakes, and they noticed that their adrenaline was 10 times normal. 10 times. What? So that's why Johnny is fighting on the playground and can't sit down in his seat, because his adrenaline is like got him all hyped up. So this is a problem. And you all know, like, do you know what's pumping me right now? Adrenaline, because I'm excited, I'm nervous, I'm presenting. When I get in that car to leave this afternoon, I'm not going to want to talk to anybody for probably 24 hours. My adrenaline's going to be done. I'm going to be gone, right? You know, you've had a party, you turn around the dirty dishes, and you're like, you start crying. Yeah, your adrenaline left, and because it shot up and it dropped and gone. So this is what's happening. These kids and you, we're drinking coffee, we're drinking caffeine, we're drinking Monster drinks. Our adrenaline is how adrenaline works. Causes your body to uptake sugar that gives you that surge of energy. So what happens? Your blood sugar drops too. So now you're tired. So now you're going to crave sugar. So I think I just wore you out by just explaining all that. But this is the vicious cycle that we're on. And the sugar, chromium is insulin's cofactor. The more sugar we eat, the more chromium is used up. The more chromium is used up, the more we crave sugar. Blah, 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 blah. Okay? Eating real bread, real whole grains, real carbohydrates slows all of that down. Remember, I told you it took my sugar cravings away, and I have more energy. So got B vitamins that give me energy. I've got fiber with the slow release of steady energy. So there we go. Couple of things I meant to read this before, and it's actually, how many of y'all have listened to my podcast, my new podcast? Anybody? I encourage you. It's called Sue's Healthy Minutes. You can get the link on our website, breadbeckers.com, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. It's on there. And the lady running the camera today with that pretty voice that told y'all to come have breakfast, she is producing them for me. So it's been really fun. And this week is going to be, this Monday it'll be released. There's 4, I think, already episodes, but you can go back and listen to them. This week is going to be Wart Stories, which I'm about to tell you, but also War Stories will be the next one. But I want to read this. This is a quote from the Complete Book of Minerals, and I've found it, and I've actually studied some other references to it. The fact that whole, unrefined grains makes a significant contribution to positive health was dramatically demonstrated in time of war, when food supply was limited and therefore forbidden by law to be fractured. If times of war bring blood, sweat, and tears, times of peace bring more heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. During World War I, which would have been shortly after white flour became very prevalent around the world too, when food shortages caused the Danish government to forbid the milling of grains. They forbid them from taking the bran and germ out. Remember what I said. Number one, food supplies were short. We can't take out 25% of that 100 pounds of grain. We got to leave it there. So they forbid it so they can make the most of what they did have. So they forbid the milling of grains. Nutrition was so improved that the death rate during wartime fell by 34%. The incidence of cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease and kidney disease also dropped markedly, while the evidence of positive health greatly increased. The same thing happened in England during World War II. They forbid the fracturing of wheat, said, nope, you can't do it. And they even developed a national bread loaf. Bread was never rationed. There's some of the anti-grain propaganda says, oh, when bread was rationed, everybody got, or forbidden, bread was forbidden, everybody got well. That is not what was forbidden. What was forbidden was white bread. They never banned bread. They just said, no more white bread. You gotta give the people, you gotta make the most of our food supply that we have and keep that bran and germ in there. And again, the health improved so drastically. Of course, as we all do, we love that convenient food. And so when the wars were over, food supplies became prevalent again, or abundant again. People went back to convenience. So I'm just here to tell you, it is not difficult to make your own bread. It's just not. It's very easy. You'll get into a rhythm and a habit and what works for your family. So this morning, or now, I want to wake you up a little bit, and I want to try to be done at 12:30, so I'm going to shorten my wart story. I was going to really go in, but I felt like I had to answer those questions. I was going to go into full detail. But years ago, before bread, when my oldest daughter, who's now 42 this year, she was only 3, she began to get warts on her hands. They just started kind of small. I took her to our pediatrician. He said, no worries. Warts are a manifestation of a viral infection. Did you know that? They'll run their course and they'll go away. I thought, hallelujah, no problem. No treatment, no medicine. We go home with the warts. I'm thinking they'll be gone soon, right? 2 years go by, she has warts still. And now they've spread, they're on her elbows. She's got a very large one on the back of her heel that rubs every time she wears shoes, and it tears and bleeds, and it's very painful. So also at this point, her younger brother is starting to get warts as well. Warts are what? A virus, which viruses are contagious, not from just touching the wart necessarily, but you usually pick them up, floors of gymnasium, shower rooms, pools. Like my daughter got one right here. You could tell it was right where she'd push up to get out of the swimming pool, hotel swimming pools. And we were traveling a lot at that time. Anyway, so he was starting to get them. So we had to do something with that large one on the back of her heel. It was bleeding and painful. So I took her back to the doctor. Like, okay, 2 years is a little long to wait on this to run its course. He said, no problem, but he sent me to a specialist. Y'all ever been sent to a specialist? So we went to the specialist, and I'm thinking, we're going in with those warts and we're coming out without them, right? I think I had a wart in college when I did gymnastics, like for a PE class. I was not a gymnast. Brad was, but I wasn't. And I got a little wart, and I went home for break one time, and he froze it off with liquid nitrogen. I thought that's what we would do, okay? So we go in. Nope, he gives me this little bottle of this liquid. It's acid, and I'm going to drip it on all of her warts. Okay? Now let me tell you how this acid works. It only treats the symptom, because what it basically is going to do is burn the healthy skin that is holding that wart onto her body, just so you know. Whether you get it burned off with liquid nitrogen or this compound W, whatever, okay? So we go home. I'm like, okay, we go home, drip acid. I said it one time, drop acid. That is not what we did. We are putting this acid all over her warts. Well, she's 6 years old. It rolls off of the warts. It burns her skin. She screams, and I'm scrubbing it all off. But we were to go back to the doctor in a week. So we go back to the doctor. And he says, all right, try putting Vaseline, and I tell him that we didn't get the acid on, that it screamed, it burned, and he would pick at them to see if they were ready to fall off, which I could have told him that. Why we go back to the doctor for them to tell us something that we can already figure out? But anyway, we do. But, so we go back. He tells me put Vaseline. Anyway, this went on for several weeks, maybe even went into months. Different tricks to get this acid on her. None of them worked. So the last, and he would pick at them, to see if they were ready to fall off. And he was, I'm sure, a good doctor, okay? But it caused her, she was 6, I guess, at the time. She was in pain, or 5, whatever it was. She was in pain. I mean, when he picked it, she would scream and she would cry. The last time she started crying, when we pulled in the parking lot, I had to drag her. I was that mom that you just said, that baby just needs a spanking. Well, she was traumatized. So we go in the doctor, and finally I'm like, look, we got to do something else. And, excuse me. So he agrees, and he decides, Bo, because she's screaming and in such pain, that we need to put her to sleep for him to deal with this. I don't even know what he was going to do. At least the big one on her heel, I was like, can we get rid of that one? So something came over me, and I'm like, we're not putting her to sleep. No, I think we'll come back another time. I said that to be nice. So we leave with the warts. I'm driving home that day. It was about a 30-minute drive home. And I remembered reading something in Adelle Davis's book years before that. Years before. Now remember, this is before bread, okay? So I remember reading in this book that vitamin E has been known to get rid of warts. Now, also vitamin E has been known to be very effective for the female's reproductive system. At the time that I was reading that, remember I told you early on that after college I read books like this and I came at things, if something's not working, I'm not getting a nutrient, right? Well, I had very irregular cycles, if any at all. Sometimes it would go a couple of years without having a cycle. Didn't care. Loved it in college. I loved it. But when you get married and you start thinking about having children, you go, something's not right here. So I had read this about vitamin E, helping that. I had begun to take a regimen of vitamin E supplementation. I began to have cycles and I began to have children. So all was good. So that day when I'm riding home in the car and I remembered reading vitamin E has been known to get rid of warts and all that other reading about other things, I'm like, I got vitamin E at home. I know how to do this. So I'm like, I'll just start giving them vitamin E. So I go home. My two kids, Ashley's, warts are pretty pronounced and the big one on her heel. Start giving her vitamin E. Caleb, who had just started getting the warts, her brother, it was 3. I have not figured out the 3-year-old thing, but they were both 3 when they started getting warts. His warts were gone in a week. It took about 3 weeks for Ashley's warts to go completely away. That was so much better than the months we had just spent traumatizing and trying to get this acid on her skin without burning it. So I was excited. A couple of years go by. My third child, now 3 years old, starts getting warts. Like I told you, I don't know the 3-year-old thing. I haven't figured that out. I got the answer, right? I don't even need to take him to the doctor. I still was taking vitamin E. Again, this is all before bread. So I start giving Joshua vitamin E capsules, or trying to, for whatever reason. How many of y'all have ever taken vitamin E? We're talking a little gelatin capsule. It's not very big. They should just slide down. Oh no, Joshua, he could not swallow a thing. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding. But I didn't worry about it because I had 2 younger children when Joshua was 3. I decided to let the Lord control the number of children I would have, and he did not control it at all. And I had 3 children in 3 years. So Joshua had 2 younger siblings by the time he was 3 years old. Remember, this is before bread, before energy, before pooping, before all of that, okay? So warts were not high up there on live with it, because if he could have swallowed the capsule, that would have been fine, but he couldn't. So 2 years go by, Joshua's warts have spread. He has one on his cuticle, fingernail right here that's about to kind of push his fingernail off. And, oh well, whatever. That's about the time I was introduced to the concept of milling my own wheat and making my own bread, the richest food source of vitamin E that we have, freshly milled flour, okay? So the mill comes into our home. I already told you all the benefits that I saw. But one of those benefits was that I saw my son's warts go away within the first month of that bread, the richest food source of vitamin E coming into our home, with no vitamin E supplementation, just our freshly milled bread. I was excited. So when I started traveling and speaking, that was in my testimony lineup. I was like, woohoo, yes. And if you listen to my podcast, this week's episode is the wart stories. So you'll hear this again. But anyway, so I was sharing, I was speaking, giving my testimony, and I'd say, my constipation stopped, my energy levels, my sinus congestion, and one of my son's warts went away. Eat this bread and your warts will go away, right? Somebody came up to me and said, Sue, everything you're saying is so scientifically sound except the wart stuff. That sounds really, really hokey. So I was like, I don't want to sound hokey. So I decided that I would not mention the wart testimony anymore because I hadn't dug to figure out why that had happened, but I have now. So I was at a homeschool show. I was about to go into my workshop. I have 45 minutes to speak at a workshop. But anyway, I do it. I cram as much as I can into that workshop. But I decided no more mentioning the wart stuff. I didn't want to sound crazy. 10, 15 minutes before my class started, a woman comes up to my table and she said, just wanted to tell you this. She said, I heard you speak last year. I bought at the show. I bought a mill, took it home. She goes, my husband listened to then it was a cassette. Now it's a CD, and now that's even obsolete. So now we're doing podcasts. But anyway, she said he listened to it. He's a medical doctor, and he wanted me to tell you everything on that tape is medically and scientifically correct. He wanted me to encourage you that way. And she goes, but I have a story to tell you. She said, I heard you speak, bought the mill, began to make bread. She said, I have a very good friend that has a big old wart on her thumb. She goes, Sue, I cannot even imagine this wart. She said it was just huge and very ingrained in her thumb. She had gone to doctor after doctor to no avail, and they basically said, live with the wart. If we tried to take the wart off, you would lose your thumb. And she said, so she lives with the wart. She'd come to my husband, and just as a friend to ask him, he goes, yeah, just live with the wart. She goes, I had just made bread that day. And I looked at my friend and said, well, I once heard this lady share how this bread got rid of her son's warts. Do you want my bread? Do you want to try? Now, who would turn down fresh milled, homemade baked loaves of bread? What you got to lose? But here's what she told me. Before her friend finished the first loaf of bread, the wart was going away. By the time she finished the second loaf of bread, she didn't tell me how long it took her to eat this bread. The wart was gone. A wart that doctor after doctor had said, live with it. If you tried to take it off, you would lose your thumb. That was pretty exciting. Needless to say, I left the table, packed up my book bags, went into my workshop, and I shared my wart story. I put that back in our testimonies. Some years later, I think it was 2004, I was speaking again at a homeschool conference in Richmond, Virginia. I went in there. Again, I have 45 minutes to share 3 hours worth of information, so I am talking. In fact, the man that records us, he said, you are the fastest talking Southerner I have ever met. Because, I'm like, I don't breathe hardly for 45 minutes. And I have to pick and choose what stories I tell, kind of like today, and I think this is going to make me run over just a tad because I really want to get to the rest of this information on vitamin E. So, but that day I started to skip the wart story. Something had held me up, and I just decided I was going to skip it, and something stopped me. And I shared my wart story. Very condensed, as fast as I could share it, I shared it. And then something miraculous happened. I have never finished on time at these workshops. I am usually still talking as I'm walking out the door because someone's coming in behind me, and I never want to go over because I'll make them late too. And so I'm just talking and talking and talking. But something happened that day that I came to a stopping point. To go on would have taken me 15, 20 more minutes, and I only had 5 more minutes. So I just stopped. And I said, does anybody have any questions? Anybody have anything they want to share? 2 people shared a wart story. 2. And one of them said, I listened to your tape, and he said, and when I got to the wart stuff, I thought that's a little hokey. But I had every other thing, the constipation, the sinus, all the other issues you talked about. He said, so I tried it. And he goes, and one day after we had been doing the bread for a while, I looked down and a wart I had most of my adult life was gone. He goes, so I'm telling you, this wart stuff is real. Both these 2 people share wart stories. Pack up my books and go out the door, and there's a lady waiting for me when I get out the door. She said, I was passing by your room to go to another workshop. There's all these workshops going on at the same time, so you pick and choose. And she said, the Lord told me to go in your room. She said, I looked at the title, and it was titled, Do Not Eat the Bread of Idleness. She goes, I thought it was a time and home management class. She goes, so I go in, and you start talking about poop and all of this stuff, but the wart stories. She had summoned her 17-year-old daughter to come to the door to meet me. They're standing there, and her daughter had over 500 warts on her. She was beautiful, beautiful girl. Tiny ones in her hairline, on her eyelashes, but then she pulled up her pants leg. She had a mass. She said she tried to count of over 250 in a mass on her leg. It's June in Richmond, Virginia. It's hot. The child would not wear shorts. She would only wear jeans, and she would not go swimming with her friends because she didn't want anybody to see that nasty mess on her leg. They followed me back to the table. She told me that she had started getting them when she was 12. They had them all burned off. Did they treat the virus? Nope. So they all came back. And now she said she's currently on ulcer medication because they think maybe it's stress related. Okay? So she follows me back to the table. She tastes the bread. She goes, how much is the mill? Told her how much the mill was. She goes, you know what? We paid more than that for one prescription medication to try to get rid of her warts that didn't work. What have I got to lose? She goes, at least, she said, I like to cook. We have to eat. At least we can eat this if it doesn't work. Oh, well. You ready for this? 2.5 weeks later, every wart on that child's body was gone. 2.5 weeks from something she had lived with for 5 years. And she told me, she said, I've been praying that the Lord would send me an answer, and I walked into your workshop. That's pretty amazing. And when I called her, we actually did a seminar, put on a event kind of like this at a church, and I got this grandiose idea that I was going to call people to come share their testimony. Tiffany, who's running the camera today, her testimony was this past week. She was one. But I called this lady from Richmond. Mind you, I'd only met her the once. I called her and I said, I have a favor to ask you. And I said, would you be willing to come and share? Yes. I said, do you need to check your calendar? No. I said, I was on my cell phone. She was on hers. And I said, how can you be sure? She goes, I told the Lord the day I prayed that if he would send me the answer, I would never turn down an opportunity to tell people about it. So she shared her testimony that day. A few years later, I was in Richmond, Virginia. Someone hosted me to come speak at a church. Her daughter came, who's now a young mother, and pulled up her sleeves. Look, Mrs. Becker, still no warts. That's exciting to me. How is this possible that something like bread, what is it in the bread that could make a virus that you've had for years go away in a matter of a couple of weeks? And if it can do that to a virus that causes warts, what else might it protect you from? And I think in the current situation we're in, I think that should give us all some confidence and hope. I'm not saying you won't get sick. I got COVID, and I actually had some complications to it, but I'm here today, alive and well. So how does vitamin E work? We're going to talk about vitamin E for the remainder of the session today. Vitamin E, richest food source of vitamin E, wheat, whole grains, sunflower seeds, so seeds, beans. They have fatty acids and they have vitamin E. Despite a wide variety of symptoms that can occur from a vitamin E deficiency, because that was my question, is how is it doing this, and how am I seeing so many thousands? I mean, literally, we've been doing this now for 30 years. We've been in business. Thousands of testimonies all over the charts of different things that people said, I only changed the bread, my cholesterol dropped 85 points in a month. I only changed the bread and this and this and this happened. This is huge. Vitamin E is a key player because what vitamin E does, like I said, despite its wide variety of symptoms of a vitamin E deficiency, it appears to have only one function in the body, simplistically put, and that is to protect fats and fat-like substances from being destroyed in the presence of oxygen. You've all heard the term antioxidant. Vitamin E is a powerful one. We're breathing. We need oxygen. We have to have oxygen to live. In fact, you're going to see in a minute, oxygen makes everything happen in our body, but it burns things up, all right? It does certain things to our body too without this protection. Vitamin E is a protector. Those fatty acids and fat-like substances are such things as vitamin A, carotene, your pituitary, adrenal, and all your sex hormones. But it also, these fatty acids make up the cell membrane of every cell in your body, the internal structure of every cell in your body, and the connective tissue that holds every cell in your body together. That's how important these fatty acids are, and that's why vitamin E affects every cell in your body, because it is protecting these fatty acids from being destroyed. Now, let's look for a minute. I haven't done this part of the talk. I haven't had time to get here in most of the years here, so I'm very excited to share this. Look for a minute at what fats are. You've all heard the term saturated and unsaturated fats, right? Fatty acids. So fats typically, they're made of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. I'm going to get a little chemistry here on you, but I'm going to keep it simple. Carbon can have 4 bonds, can attach to 4 things. So if it's attached here to carbon, and usually fats are long chains of carbon atoms, and then they'll be attached to 3 other things here, okay? So a saturated fat is going to be no double bond and have hydrogens attached, and that's what it means by saturated, okay? An unsaturated fat has usually multiple double bonds connecting the carbons. So that means it can only attach to 2 other things, right? So this not as saturated. Saturated fats are usually solid at room temperature. That's your butter and your animal fats typically. Unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. Y'all with me? You okay? All right. What is significant about this? Double bonds, I don't want to say they're unstable, but they're easily broken. And they're easily broken so that this fat can attach to something else. And what these jobs do, and what vitamin E does, is it protects this fat, this double bond from breaking, and it'll attach with it'll attach with the vitamin E to deliver this to the cell unoxidized. It protects it from attaching to oxygen. Are you with me? This double bond very easily breaks so that the fatty acid can attach itself to other things. Vitamin E attaches to keep it from breaking and attaching to an oxygen and oxidizing and spoiling. Does that make sense? Why is that important to your body? Because these fatty acids, like I said, they attach to a protein to make up the membrane of every cell in your body. They attach to prostaglandins to form every hormone in your body. They attach to cholesterol to form all kinds of things. They do a job. Once they get delivered to the cell, that bond breaks and they're attached to something in that cell or in the bloodstream to make something else. They're the precursor of so many things in our body. Are you with me? So vitamin E's function is to attach to that fatty acid, to keep that double bond from breaking and to keep it from attaching to oxygen, and that's caused to keep it from oxidizing. Because if oxygen attaches, then it can't attach to other things. Are you with me? I'm trying to explain a little bit of a complicated subject. I'm not doing a very good job. What does hydrogenation mean? They take a liquid oil, okay, right, and bubble hydrogen gas in it and saturate it, right? So that's what hydrogenation means. What's wrong with this is very stable. When you don't have double bonds and everything's saturated, this doesn't break away. And this can't attach to other things in your body to make other important nutrients that your body needs. It's not usable. Does that make sense? So that's the problem with hydrogenated oils. And I was reading just this week, partially hydrogenated oils you would think might be a little better. They're actually worse. That's what's called trans fats. Okay? So this is a problem. Now, there are some solid fats like in meat and in butter. Those are a little bit different and they are metabolized more like a carbohydrate than a saturated fat. So they're not dangerous, not if they're natural. The problem is the unnatural ones. Are y'all with me? Okay. So let's look at what this vitamin E does. It protects this fatty acid from oxidizing, from this bond breaking and attaching to oxygen, because when it does, it actually becomes a peroxide. That's what that is, peroxide, and becomes damaging to the cells. So without vitamin E, cells in your body can be easily damaged. The cell membrane, what did I say? Is made up of a fatty acid attached to a protein. If this is attached to something else and can't attach to the protein, then your cell membrane is going to be compromised. If your cell membrane is compromised, guess what happens? How does a virus work? Do you know how that works? Bacteria can reproduce on their own. So you get a bacterial infection, it's reproducing on its own. A virus can't do that. A virus has to invade your cell and use your cell's reproductive pathway to reproduce. And then it reproduces and invades other cells and reproduces. And you with me? If this cell membrane is compromised because no vitamin E, fatty acid breaking down and oxidizing can't form that cell membrane, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be more susceptible to a viral invasion. Does that make sense? And that's why a virus that causes warts, you give it the vitamin E that it needs, it can protect the integrity of every cell in your body, and you're less susceptible to viral invasion. Okay? And that's why I believe our kids, I noticed they just didn't get sick as much. Not that we never got sick, but it was usually if they did get a virus that was going around, it was very insignificant, maybe a fever a day or two, sore throat, and they were well. No doctor visits were necessary. Does this make sense to you? Now, what if this cell membrane that's compromised? So we've talked about viruses. Now you know that's how it worked to get rid of warts. And my thinking is, if it can get rid of 500 warts in 2.5 weeks, if it can strengthen the integrity of every cell in your body in 2.5 weeks to fight a virus that you've had for 5, 6, 7 years, what else is it going to do, and what else can it protect you from? What other cells in your body are strengthening? Pretty amazing, huh? What if it's the cells of your vessels, your veins, your arteries, your blood vessels that are compromised and they're breaking down at a faster rate than they can reproduce? You understand that all your cells die and reproduce, all right? So intestinal cells reproduce in 36 hours. They die, they reproduce, they make new. Blood cells, it's about 4 months. White blood cells, it's about 2 days. Brain cells, it's about 60 years. That's why brain damage is so long term. You're probably going to outlive those cells repairing themselves. Okay? So what if these cells are dying at a faster rate than they can reproduce because of oxidation? What's going to happen to this vessel? What if it's the main vein in your leg and you get a blood clot? Your body's, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. It's going to divert that blood to the smaller vessels. So you're going to have something called varicose veins. That was one of the first testimonies, first 1 or 2 years we were teaching. We went up to North Georgia to teach. Lady came up to me. First of all, she said, I heard you speak. I laughed when you said that about the sugar craving. She goes, I was a Coke and candy bar, or whatever her thing was. I don't remember. And she goes, I leaned over to my husband and was like, no way. And then the next, when I went up again, been doing this for a week and haven't had it. Just haven't wanted it, haven't needed it. But then she told me after several months she had been doing, I went up again to their place to speak. And she said, varicose veins run in my mother and my sister. They have them terribly. She goes, mine are gone. And I don't have them. That's pretty significant. So these are just things, just a few things. Scars. How many of you heard about vitamin E helping to keep scars from forming? How does that work? So in vitamin E doing its job of delivering these fatty acids to the cells where they're needed to make whatever they need to make and whatever they need to do, it also means that it's delivering oxygen to the cells in a pure form, but it also reduces the need for oxygen by those cells. So when you get a cut, you sever your skin, say your arm or whatever, it's going to be a reduced blood supply to that cut. Well, vitamin E, what it does is it helps those cells that make normal cells not need as much oxygen to make normal cells. Scar tissue doesn't require as much oxygen as normal cells. So vitamin E, are y'all with me? I know it's tired, y'all had lunch, but I'm like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm explaining this correctly. Does that make sense? So because your blood supply has been limited now by a severe cut, if you apply the vitamin E, it will help you be able to make normal cells with the reduced oxygen that's there instead of scar tissue that doesn't need as much oxygen. So that's why a scar is formed. Isn't that fascinating to me? So muscle cells. What if your muscle cells are breaking down faster than they're able to replace? You're going to have weak muscles. Vitamin E has been known. In fact, athletes, their endurance is much greater when they take supplementation of vitamin E. In Adelle Davis's book, I remember reading about vitamin E and that muscle strength. And she made the comment about babies born in America, how they have the wobbly necks and they can't hold their heads up. And she said that shouldn't be. That the reason she attributed it to was the muscle weakness from not having an ample amount of vitamin E in our diet. Prior to white bread, it was estimated that we got about 150 units a day. Now it's considered less than 7 units a day. But I remember reading that about the babies' necks, and I had 5 babies before bread and 2 babies after bread. I will tell you this story. My 6th child, from the very beginning, and I know some of it's genetics, she just seemed to be more muscular, had more strength, and I had her in a facility that let me go home in 24 hours. And so I was sitting across the room from Brad. He was reclined, kind of, leaning back on a pillow on the bed, and he had her laying on his stomach, stomach to stomach. You know what I'm saying? And I watched from across the room her scoot up his chest, 1 day old. And she could lift her head with no wobbling. That's pretty, 1 day old. She moved herself in a reclined position. That's pretty amazing. That wasn't just she slipped there. And then my 7th child, when she was born, she had swallowed some meconium in the birth process, so they had to aspirate her. And so they took her away, and they were dealing with her. And, of course, she started screaming and screaming and screaming. So the midwife was still working with me. And, this is just minutes after she was born. So finally, they wrap her up. They get her all cleaned up. They wrap her up, and they come and put her on my chest. And they lay her on my chest, and she's laying like this. I don't know how to demonstrate. She's laying face down away from me. I'm, of course, reclined. And she's laying like that, looking down. And the midwife said something to me, and I answered her because they're still working on me. And when I answered her, my baby was still crying and crying and crying. But when I answered her, Olivia stopped crying. So first of all, she heard my voice, and I don't think that had anything to do with vitamin E. She just knew her mama. And but then here's what happened. From this position, she lifted her head and looked me straight in the eye. Lifted her head. Now, I know they say babies can't see, but she lifted her head to look where I was. Minutes old. And she, too, seemed to have muscular strength that the first 5 didn't have. Not that they weren't strong and eventually, but they all had the little floppy heads, and neither one of those children did. And I thought that was interesting. So muscular weakness is significant. And I could go on and on. Red blood cells. What if it's your red blood cells that are weakened and they're dying at a faster rate than your body can replace them? You're going to have anemia. That was in one of our classes. We had a lady stand up. She was right over there. And she said, all my life I've been anemic. I've been doing this bread for, I think she said 6 months or something. She said, I just had my blood checked, and for the first time in my life, I'm not anemic. What does that tell you? Now, there's other causes of anemia besides red blood cells. But if that's the problem, that's pretty amazing to me. And we've heard it over and over and over. And the wart stories and cholesterol is probably our 2 biggest testimonies. And I'll talk about cholesterol in just a minute when I talk about heart disease. Heart disease. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about heart disease. Psalm 104 says this, that God gave man bread to strengthen and nourish the heart. What's in bread that would strengthen and nourish the heart? Dr. Wilfred Shute, world-renowned cardiologist in Canada, treated his heart patients with vitamin E. And he spoke all over the world at heart cardiology symposiums telling doctors what he had found about vitamin E. Vitamin E, protecting the integrity of every cell in your body, strengthened the muscle of the heart. But not only that, it prevented clots, which that is one of the biggest causes of heart disease and angina, is clots in the vessels. Another, and listen to what he says. I thought this was fascinating too. Let's see, I think it's here. I want to read you this quote. Maybe I don't have it in here. I'll find it in a minute. But this is clot prevention. He says that it's irrefutably. Now, his books, again, not at all on flour milling, but he says irrefutably when white flour and white bread came on the scene with the sifting away of the bran and germ. This is Dr. Wilfred Shute, world-renowned cardiologist, treating heart disease with vitamin E. He said when white flour, white bread came on the scene and they took the bran and germ away, we lost one of the most potent antithrombin agents there is. Vitamin E was lost in the bread. Cholesterol is another issue with heart disease, but I am here today to tell you cholesterol is not a bad guy. You need it. Just about every cell in your body needs cholesterol as well. But listen to this. This is Adelle Davis on her chapter on reducing blood cholesterol. An important function of at least 3 of the B vitamins, choline, inositol, and B6, is to help maintain normal blood cholesterol levels, which becomes excessive when any one of these vitamins is undersupplied. Cholesterol deposited in the arteries has become a national problem in the United States. Adelle Davis died in 1974. What do you think she would say today? Okay, number 1 killer in America, heart disease. Cholesterol deposited in the arteries has become a national problem in the United States, and many investigators believe it to be a major cause of death from heart disease. Problems of cholesterol arose only, please listen to this is not a book on flour milling. She was a writer of vitamins and minerals and using them as treatment, supplementation. Problems of cholesterol arose only after 1910, when machinery first came into use, which removed most of the minerals and vitamins from breads and cereals. Since then, these 3 vitamins, 3 B vitamins, inositol, choline, and B6, and vitamin E, have been largely discarded and have never been added back to so-called enriched flour. These nutrients are all in whole grains, beans, seeds. Inositol, choline, B6 make up something called lecithin, which is a phospholipid, which breaks down fat and cholesterol, gets it out of your bloodstream into your cells where they're needed, or be able to be picked up by a fatty acid. Cholesterol is needed so much in so many processes. And the whole thing about bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, there is no such thing. What the bad cholesterol is, the LDL, it's the transport vehicle for the cholesterol to the cells. So the fact that it is there means that it's not picked up. So it can't be used. Can't be, so because it wasn't emulsified to get to your cells. Does that make sense? The LDL has already deposited that cholesterol and it's on the way back to pick up more. Okay? So it's not really bad. It's just the indication that cholesterol wasn't able to get picked up and used where it was supposed to be used. Does that make sense? Okay. So fatty acids. What else do they break apart and combine with? So protein to form the cell membrane. If they're not available because they're being oxidized and that cell membrane is weakened, we've already talked, varicose veins, scars, muscle weakness, heart disease, all these things, viral invasion, all these things happen. Another thing that this fatty acid might bind with is something called, and that'll break, something called prostaglandins. These are hormone-like substances that are made within a cell, okay? So they combine with this fatty acid, taken to other cells. These are huge anti-inflammatory substances. Water retention, muscle contraction, nerve transmissions needed here. What if this fatty acid is oxidized, can't get here? Inflammation, water retention, nerve problem. You see what I'm saying? It's just a snowball effect that we keep seeing. One of the most prevalent jobs that these prostaglandins bound to a fatty acid does is form something called thromboxane. This is what causes your blood to clot. We want our blood to clot, right? Naturally, if you get a bad cut, we want it to clot. We don't want to bleed to death. We don't want our blood to be too thin. Another one is, I always get this one wrong, thromboxane, prostacyclin. I'm sorry, I'm running into things. Prostacyclin. This is what keeps your blood thin, okay? So if we have a problem here, what do you think, if we can't form one, what do you think might be the most important one to form? Possibly the one that clots to keep us from bleeding to death. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Our body's going to do what it needs, the important thing it needs to do to stay alive. So if these fatty acids are being oxidized, can't bind with the prostaglandins, you might have an imbalance of one or the other of these. You see what role this vitamin E plays in protecting these fatty acids so it can be delivered to the cells. Now it binds with cholesterol. This to me was probably one of the most fascinating. One of the jobs of cholesterol is to bind with these fatty acids. This is the precursor of every sex hormone, every anti-inflammatory, all your adrenals, all your pituitary, all your sex hormones, and steroids that your body produces. Why are we on so many steroids? Our body could produce it if we had what it took to do it. To me, this is amazing. God's creation, bread. Jesus compared himself to bread for a reason. So that's how I believe genetics plays a huge role. And I think what happens is where you're going to fall apart first. Vitamin E is there protecting the integrity of every cell in your body, protecting these fatty acids so that every cell in your body is protected. But where is your weak link if you don't have it? Mine, I think, was my female hormone issues. I was strong, athletic, but I had issues, and it ran in my family. So I think that's kind of where my lack of vitamin E and my need for vitamin E, that's where it affected me. It might be heart disease. Have you ever wondered why you have two people in a family, husband and wife, they're eating the same thing, and this one's obese, and this one's skinny, and this one has this disease, and this one has this disease? Some of it is genetic, but not everything we're hearing is genetic, and just because something's genetic doesn't mean we can't circumvent it. So I hope that you leave here today with hope, because there's things that run in my family that I have circumvented. So I have 7 children. One of my sisters had tremendous issues having children. So funny, when people, we live rurally, so we have a well and it's well water. And when people would come up to our house and they'd go, oh gosh, I'm not drinking the water around here. And I'm like, oh, it's not the water, it's the bread. Have a roll. So anyway, we've had testimonies of people that young wives that couldn't get pregnant. And within a few months of eating the bread, they got pregnant. Don't fear if you don't want that. But some of us are too old. But anyway, do you see what I'm saying? It goes on and on and on and on. And I could go on and on, but I think we'll close up today. I'm fixing to. It's where I'm going. Nope. I want to close with this because I want to have time. Oh, it's 1:37? I didn't realize I was already late. Okay. I'm gonna do this because this is powerful. When I was reading and studying, I spent weeks just studying vitamin E. And I'm sorry I was a little discombobulated and I don't feel like I did it justice, but I think you got the message. Vitamin E is critically important to protecting those fatty acids from oxidation. Those fatty acids make up not only the cell membrane, every cell in your body, the internal structure, the connective tissue that holds every cell in your body together. When I was reading this information, one line stuck out at me, and it said, vitamin E is destroyed doing its job. So vitamin E is used up. It's very difficult to overdose in vitamin E, even though it's a fatty acid. Even though it's a fat-soluble vitamin. But when I read those words, vitamin E is destroyed when it's doing its job, I could not help but think of Jesus that gave up his life so that we could live. And I kept praying. I was like, Lord, there is a bigger picture here than I can even imagine. And it started coming and Brad was getting ready for work and I just all of a sudden put on my shoes. I'm like, I got to get out of the house. It was more than I could contain. I felt like Moses and just it was more than I could contain. Please understand, this is just an analogy and pictures only go so far. I'm not saying Jesus is vitamin E, but I got to show you this because it's pretty powerful. So I was on my walk. I still to this day, and this was 20 years ago, remember the mailbox where I was when this all just came flooding back. I came home. Brad was actually stepping out of the shower, and I start drawing all of this on the shower door because it was so amazing. Okay, God is an all-consuming fire, he says. He can destroy, but he is who gives us life, right? So God is represented by oxygen. That's not Oz, that's O2, okay? Oxygen. He makes everything happen, right? We are the cells because we are the body of Christ. I say we are the cells of Christ. The fatty acid, always in Scripture, what is representative of the Holy Spirit? The oil, right? This is the Holy Spirit. Jesus is the vitamin E. He attaches himself to the Holy Spirit to deposit the Holy Spirit into every cell in our body. He promises us he will not leave us helpless. And he gave up his life so that we could have the Holy Spirit of God living in us, protecting us. And now we are reconciled to God, and he will no longer destroy us, but he gives us life. That is amazing to me, that even the way God created our bodies points to our need for a Savior. And the scriptures tell us in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 6, there are distinctive varieties of operation, of working to accomplish things, but it is the same God who inspires and energizes them all. As Jesus breaks away and puts this Holy Spirit in our cells, this cell might be used to make a heart cell. This cell might be used to make a vein cell. This cell might be used to make a muscle cell. It is the same God. It is the same Holy Spirit that energizes us all to go and be and do whatever God created us to do with the help of this fatty acid Holy Spirit. Is that not amazing to you? It was just so amazing, and it's been years since I've been able to explain it because I only have 45 minutes at my talks. But Brad was like, you got to share that today. So to me, I hope you were blessed by that. I hope it ministered to you the way it ministered to me. In closing, I will want to share one other scripture with you. I find bread scriptures everywhere. I can't help it, and even sometimes when I least expect it. But Deuteronomy 24, verse 6. Do y'all read through the Bible? You get Genesis is so easy. And then Exodus is easy. And then Leviticus. And Numbers gets a little better. But I actually saw some things in Leviticus that I've never seen before. So that was good. Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And then Deuteronomy, it all starts again. You're like, okay, how many calves can we kill today? You know? So, but I'm reading along, trudging along in Deuteronomy. I come to chapter 24, verse 6, and I see this verse. Amazing. Blew me away. It's a verse about borrowing and lending. In those days, if you borrowed something from someone, well, even I guess today, you have to put down collateral, I guess. But if you borrowed something from someone, you gave them something of value to hold until you paid them back, right? So I'd give you my iPad. You hold that until I bring back what I borrowed from you. And it says in Deuteronomy 24, verse 6, do not take a man's upper millstone as a pledge, because you would be taking his life. That's how important milling your grain is. And that's what we let someone do in the early 1900s. We let them take our millstone, and we have been dying ever since. That is pretty powerful to me. I want to pray. I'm going to close with that. I don't think we can get any better than that. So God bless you all. I thank you for coming today. I thank our online viewers for watching. I pray this has blessed you. I pray it has inspired you. I will push aside my books after I pray and dismiss the class. Any of you that have never seen flour be milled, I'm telling you, it's as easy as taking the canister of flour out of your cabinet. If you've never done that, we can help you there too. All right, we're here to come alongside of you in this journey. We're passionate about what we do because we've seen it work. This is not, it's a life. And to me, the anti-grain, anti-gluten propaganda that's out there, it is just another scheme of the enemy to not only make us unhealthy, but now make us unprepared. Don't forget, grains are storable. When hard times come, grains can sustain your life. And that's what it was intended to do. God bless you. We just love you all. We appreciate you coming, and I'll pray a blessing for you. Thank you, Lord God, for this day. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for your revelation. Thank you for your goodness and your love to us, that you bring us back to you. Thank you for answered prayers, Lord, and thank you for using me to bring this truth to your people, to set us free, to bring you glory, and to bring us life, and that you came so that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for this day. Bless each family represented here. Continue to lead them and guide them in your truth. Expose the works and the schemes and the lies of the enemy so that we can walk in the truth that will set us free. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.